Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you enjoy lunch. Thank you, Doug and crew, for providing the sustenance. And I know there's those that are maybe still eating lunch now, but hopefully they'll join us soon. Always grateful for the bounty. As you've noticed in terms of the progression of the conversation today, that we've had, our commissioner of reclamation, we've had the governor of Colorado, and then we've had the state's representatives. And then we heard a perspective from Roberto Salmon in terms of Mexico. Thank you so much, Roberto, for providing that context and being as candid as you could, in light of whatever's going on right now between our countries. And so, and the progression of sovereigns and the progression of decision makers in the basin. And we're going to hear soon, real quickly here, from a pretty amazing group of tribal leadership in the basin. But in my mind, they are national leaders because the issues and the concerns and the representation of their community absolutely is precedent setting in terms of where tribal involvement and engagement is at right now. And so we wanted to make sure that we were responsible and hopefully, portraying a view or giving you a lens in terms of where tribal leadership is in the basin. And specifically, and make sure that we were responsible to look at, the different areas, because as you know, and I'm so grateful for Commissioner Tootin this morning for saying it for me, but I will say it again, because I said it for years and years. If you know one tribe, you know one tribe. And that was all about, educating folks in the basin about, wow, there's still 30 indigenous sovereigns in the basin. And during that time, we found another one because we're saying 29 for a long time, remember? And then all of a sudden, we're like, oh, the Paiutes that were terminated, they don't have a land base, but they were reinstated. Is that what the term is? And so there's been this progression of this conversation in terms of making sure that we have an upper basin tribal perspective, we have a lower basin CAP poly perspective, we have an on-river tribe perspective, and then we also have the perspective of the Navajo Nation, which sits in the middle of it all. Maybe by no accident, right? And so very grateful today to have an incredible panel that's going to share, where they're at right now in terms of their policy conversations and what are those things that they're doing to make sure that their membership and is represented in the way that that they choose to be represented, and what does that actually look like? And we've heard a lot today about, and I really appreciate it, Tom Bashatsky's comments about, spatial scales. Because, when I think about spatial scales, I think absolutely about relationships and, and those overlapping areas. Because if you were here at this conference probably, 10 years ago or so, we would still be dramatically or incredibly siloed still. But the need for building human relationships and being able to share each other's experience, strength, and hope in terms of this underlying common value and how quickly that has progressed. And just real quickly, I think of the context of this conversation is also that just recently, and thank you so much, Camille and staff, for recognizing the 20-tribe consensus letter around principles and elements that those 20 tribal sovereigns thought needed to be included in any scenario or any alternative or any planning. And those basic principles are trust, responsibility, flexible tools, and inclusion. And so I think we've heard a lot about that in terms of from the federal government, from state government today about there's a willingness there and there's an opportunity to actually move things forward. And the tribes themselves, created this, that sign-on letter. And why is that so important? Why do I bring that up? Because you had a situation where 20 tribes built consensus around the idea of future policy based on a structure that maybe puts them at contention with each other. And they did that within a month's period of time. When you consider, we hear the panel from the states earlier, they've been engaged in this rhetoric for over 100 years. And so, if we can if tribes I get to view all this, can come to consensus within a few months about those common values that underlie what they want to forward for themselves is a pretty powerful thing. And right now, the willingness, absolutely, from what we heard earlier this morning, is this progression of willingness to think about, what are those structures that still need to be created. And so, I'm going to start off first with, my good friend, Lorelei Cloud, who's the vice-chairman of the Southern Ute tribe. And I got to sit along Lorelei, a long time ago when she was chairwoman of the 10 Tribes Partnership. And it's been incredible to witness her leadership. And she's part of a group of women that started the Indigenous Women's Leadership Network as well. And I know a lot of you are out there, and about really a powerful concept about succession and mentorship. And, and I could go on and on about Lorelei. She's the first Colorado Conservation Board Indigenous woman member. That's a mouthful. And she's a trustee for the Nature Conservancy of Colorado. And again, really expanding those partnerships and opportunities for community. So, Lorelei?
Thank you. I don't know which mic's working, so
Okay.
I'm going to use both. Okay. So since I have a captive audience, I'm going to use photos because sometimes pictures say, again, 1,000 words. So thank you, Daryl, for the introduction. I do have to also say that I am now the vice chair of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. So we're slowly making tribes being part of the conversations. So again, I want to take I think it's really important to understand tribes and you have to understand our history in this country, in this continent. And so I can only speak about my tribe, and I want to start with a little bit of history of the Southern Ute people. And so the Ute people are the first inhabitants of this entire area that we're sitting on right now. So welcome to Ute country, because as I say that, you have to remember too, our people paid a very precious price for you all to be sitting in this room. And so acknowledging that and acknowledging the 3 Ute tribes that are here, the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, Chairman Hart is here somewhere. I don't know where, he may be in the overflow room, but we also have the vice chairman from the Ute Indian tribe here as well too. So Utes again have a very prominent part of what happens in this area here, and particularly for me, the state of Colorado. We are the first inhabitants. Our creation story starts here in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, and we've continued to be here. So we are the first conservationists into this area. Conservationist is the westernized type thinking of taking care of the land, but we had there's a connection between the Ute people and nature. We always took care of each other because we always knew that nature was going to take care of us. We never took more than what was needed, and we made sure that we always gave back in prayers and whatever else we can give back to nature. And so there was always this relationship between us and nature. And when Daryl talked this morning and he said that he liked the 10 Tribes Partnership's vision statement because it talks about a spiritual mandate. This is how Native people work. This is our daily lives. This is how we are very innately connected to creation. Everything in here is creation. And so that's how we see and view the world. So back to my history. In 1868, at one time, my reservation truly encompassed about 15 million acres in the Western Slope. And we had to see that through different events like the Bruna Agreement, and we had to give up 3.7 million acres of our Ute land. And then we ended up with this little bitty piece of land. Even though this little piece of land is very deceptive because my reservation was open to settlement. So we have a settlement and we have the allotments in this little piece of land. So I have two counties. I have a national monument. I have U.S. forestry. I have tribal trust, tribal assignment. I have fee land and county land, all within this little piece of land. And this is how we're supposed to operate. So it very much complicates issues like law enforcement, but particularly with water delivery systems. Because we have to deliver water to not just to tribal members, but to non-tribal members in order to get water to a tribal member. And so when we talk about that, this is what my reservation looks like. I have 7 rivers that flow through my reservations, which is very different. It's very, oh, it's working here. Sorry. Let's try this. Nope. Nope. Sorry.
You stopped the panel here.
So I guess I won't be using pictures.
I bet you he knows the answer.
Ah. So I'll go back to the beginning and see what that. Maybe. Let's see. So this is my first slide. Maybe. Nope.
It's not advanced.
Nope, it is not.
Thank goodness.
I'm just breaking everything here.
Looks like Daryl's in charge.
This presentation?
Yes. Can you go back first? Awesome. There we go. Okay. All right. So again, this is what our people were, photos of I guess one of the first few photos of documenting the Utes in Colorado. And so I'll give you a quick little bit of history. So this woman right here, this may be an old photo, but she raised me. So go back, let's see. So this is what my reservation looked like in 1868. And I do also have to mention the Ute Indian tribe, primarily the Utes that were here, they were forced into Utah, and their water rights and their reservation was created in 1861. And so they have one of the oldest water rights in the Colorado River system. Again, so this is what my reservation looks like again today, a very small piece of land. And these are the rivers that flow through my reservation. Again, many tribes don't have rivers that flow through the reservation, but I have 7. But because of drought conditions and climate change, this is what my rivers look like. So when we talk about water delivery and how we move forward in in getting water to our tribal members, again, we have to be able to work this system in order for water to move and to, for us to get water to where it needs to be. And so when we talk about our BIA infrastructure system, this system was put in the 1800s. It's a BIA system owned and operated by the federal government. It's 175 miles of canal systems, and only 15% of it works because it looks like this. And the last time, again, it was maintained was in the 1960s, but every single water user, tribal and non-tribal, pay an O&M fee every single year for water that they never receive. But I do have to say, under Commissioner Tootin, she has gotten us $2.3 million to help put in 6 crested weirs, which is going to help part of the system in helping the flow, some of the flows through that. Even though BOR is not the BIA, she took it upon herself to help us. Even though it's not fully fixing the system, it's still creating some kind of assistance to the water flows. And so we're very grateful for her to do that. I do also have to say that BIA, well, the federal government in general, really needs to uphold their trust responsibility. And under the Bureau of Reclamation, they are still an arm of the federal government, just like the BIA, and they still have to fulfill their trust responsibility and support and protect tribal interests and tribal water rights. So when we talk about tribal inclusion, we have worked very hard in creating different, actually, no, let me take this back. So these are some of the dates that are very important to us as Southern Utes, and I think to a large quantity to Native Americans in this country. Because the one that speaks the loudest here is 4 days ago, it was 100 years of the anniversary of the Indian Citizenship Act. Let me just repeat that, 100 years of the Indian Citizenship Act. And this Snyder Act is basically, it's the real name of this act, it's called the Snyder Act. It's one paragraph, giving citizenship. It's not several pages of a document, it's one paragraph. And so when we talk about the 2020 sovereigns signing on to a document, how hard is that for everybody to come to some kind of consensus on how we're going to maintain this river system when you have one paragraph that gives citizenship to Native Americans? So when we talk about tribal inclusion, one of the main ones that we did was the 6 tribes in the Upper Basin and the 4 sovereign states have been meeting in August will be 2 years. We started formally meeting, and coming to some kind of a consensus. Some of those conversations we had were very, very hard. And so once we got through those hard conversations, because we developed this environment for us to have those conversations, there was a lot of hurt feelings, but we got through those things. But the thing is, once we got over that hurdle of having those really tough conversations, we came to the consensus that we want to continue working together as a collective. And so when we got together and we said, well, what does this look like? We came up with an MOU. So this MOU basically is saying that we as a collective in the Upper Basin are going to move together as a collective in making the decisions on what happens with the water. This doesn't give us a formalized seat in the process, and that's something that we're working towards, because ultimately we need to have a formalized mechanism, a formalized seat in the conversations, not just conversations, but actually having the decisions to make decisions about our own water. And so, again, it's just an MOU, very simple language. And again, all of these sovereigns got together, and we knew that this was the easiest thing for us to do. And so how can we, as the Upper Basin, come to a consensus like this, especially when you have tribes and states that don't get along, and tribes and states that do get along, come to a consensus? That means that everybody here should be able to put our egos aside and find the best possible solution to sustain this river system. Because we only have the one river, and we all share it regardless of where we're at. How can we work together in making sure that that happens? So again, we're working with different organizations in the Upper Basin. Again, the 10 Tribes Partnership has been very valuable over the past few years. Daryl and I, again, we're both the chairmen of the partnership, and this is the time when we created the tribal water study. It was under Daryl's tenure that this conversation that came up about creating the water study, and when I was the chairmanship, we finished the water study. And so again, this water study showed everything that we had already knew, that tribes, 10 out of the 30 tribes have 20 to 30% of the entire river system. So understanding that and knowing that tribes now in Arizona have been able, particularly Navajo, have settled their water, that number has increased. So you cannot leave us out of those conversations. So I'm asking everybody in here to normalize tribal voices being at the decision-making table, letting us make those decisions that affect our people. So I think with that, I'd just like to thank you for letting me capture your time for a few moments. And I just hope that we have some good questions at the end. Well, I know we will, but thank you.
Wow, thank you, Lorelei. I always get teared up when you talk. One of the things I wanted to just highlight real quickly too was it was maybe a couple of years ago. Dr. Matt McKinney and I got a call from Tom Bushotsky saying that 7 Basin states had an interest in a conversation with the tribes who were interested in having that conversation. And so they started a monthly meeting, based on that request. And those early conversations with the tribal representatives and the state representatives were incredibly robust. And one of the things, and I appreciate the state partners, because they acknowledged from those conversations that tribes were at parity with their sovereignty. And that was so important, that every one of the basin states acknowledged that parity of sovereignty. And it absolutely transcends to, parity of leadership as well, and the recognition that, we got Governor Polis today, but where are the other governors as well? If we're going to truly have parity of sovereignty, then there should be parity of representation. And so I think that's something that's really moved as well. And so with that, I want to introduce, not only a leader in the basin, but a national leader as well, whether not only tribal, but just in general, is Governor Lewis. And I always, I get, every time I introduce Governor Lewis, I can't help but think of his father, Rod Lewis, because at every CRUA conference, he would always be sitting right in the front row. And I always really appreciated that because, that's kind of where these conversations started. Because there wasn't a conversation before. So thank you, Governor Lewis, for your leadership, and please come up.
Thank you. Thank you, Daryl. And it's just an honor to be able to just talk in front of you and with these amazing tribal leaders, these water warriors. I also want to recognize that I have a couple of our leadership from the community as well. I have Councilwoman Jennifer Allison here. She's also my aunt. And when Vice Chair Lorelei Cloud was talking about the incredible photograph that of the woman who raised her, she actually was one of my babysitters growing up as well too. So she helped to raise me as well. And I have 2 other council members as well, Councilman Avery White and Councilman Joe Manuel Jr. as well. Thank you for being here. You know, it's always, you know, it's always a difficult time when I have to go out, when I have to go after Lorelei here. but you know, I think we have such unique stories, and I want to just to jump into mine. But before I do that, you know, I just want to say Anyana Apchugat, Governor Stephen Roe Lewis of the Gila River Indian Community, Skugtash. And I want to start too as well, because you know we're in some amazing times here in regards to water. Some times of great difficulty and of great consequence, but also from tribal leadership, some great and amazing you know, victories that have happened recently. And I want to start to take a moment again to congratulate my good friend, President Nygren, and the Navajo Nation for reaching the settlement on their Arizona water rights. As well as I know, you're going to have the opportunity to hear from an amazing other leader from the Hopi tribe, Chairman Navangmia, as well, who is part of that water settlement as well. And I want to also congratulate the Hopi tribe as well. Now, Mr. President, this is a monumental achievement, especially in the difficult times that we're facing now with less water in the system. And I know there's still a lot of work ahead to get this finally approved by Congress. We've talked about that a little outside, but I know that you've reached a historic milestone nonetheless, and I wanted to acknowledge it again today, my good friend. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the Colorado River Indian Tribe's recent approval of their key agreement among the tribes, Arizona, and the United States. That is another important step forward in implementing your legislation water rights in Arizona. Congratulations again, Vice Chair, and yeah, send your best to the Chairwoman, who's also my aunt as well. So that shows how interrelated we are. And you know, Vice Chairman Lomayesva, your legislation was historic and will not only be important to how Arizona will adjust to having less water in the future, but it's also just an important example of how tribes can be part of the solution as we face the future with less water in the basin, a new normal, if you will. Now, I remembered last year at this conference, I, along with my fellow tribal leaders on this panel, called on the United States, the basin states, to establish a forum where the 30 basin tribes, 7 basin states, and the U.S. could discuss the post-2026 process guidelines together, respectfully, respecting tribal sovereignty. We now have that forum, and I call it the 38 Sovereigns. Reclamation calls it the Federal Tribes States Working Group. Whatever you call it, it's historic nonetheless, especially if you compare the 2007 interim guidelines process to the post-2026 EIS process. It comes to how involved and engaged tribes are in the process compared to that past process where we didn't have a seat at the table. And I want to personally, again, thank the department, thank Commissioner Tootin in particular for making this happen. I vividly remember last year at this conference, Commissioner, when that I pulled Commissioner Tootin aside and said, Commissioner, we need to get this done. And she told me, Governor, I will get this done. And I really appreciate her making sure that this group came together. Thank you again, Commissioner Tootin, for your leadership. So I'll put this out here. Why now? Why did the United States establish this 38 Sovereigns Forum? So from my perspective, they did it because this administration understands the federal trust responsibility to tribes and knew they had to include tribes to better understand what tribes expect regarding protecting all of our water rights. Now, tribal water rights are different than non-Indian water rights. They have a special status. And for example, in 2004, 20 years ago, the Gila River Indian Community's water settlement was approved by Congress. And in that federal legislation, our water rights became federal trust resources that the United States has a duty to protect. I'm going to repeat that the United States has a duty to protect as a trust resource. And because our settlement included Colorado River water, the Arizona Water Settlement Act of 2004 altered the law of the river. Now, as a result, when we as a basin, and I know the vast majority of us, if not all of us, support this, but when we in the basin say we need to tackle the supply and demand imbalance and need to impose upfront reductions of 1.5 million acre feet in the lower basin, the United States is then put in a very awkward position. It now has a huge challenge before them because this is not Mother Nature taking its course. This proposed upfront cut is a regulatory action that now puts a substantial amount of federal protected trust resources, because that is what tribal rights are. Again, it puts these federally protected resources in the crosshairs of another taking, potentially. So now, tribes must be at the table, and their rights and interests can no longer be ignored. And I'm so grateful that we have an administration that understands this responsibility and is willing to look at options that protect tribal trust resources. Now, regarding that, I know some of the basin leaders and representatives met yesterday, and I've hoped to be able to attend that meeting, but unfortunately I couldn't. We had a council meeting yesterday, and it was a particularly important one. We swore in some new council members pursuant to our Constitution as a sovereign nation. But we also are dealing with a tragic incident back home where 2 young people lost their lives. One was one of our police officers who had just started with us, and the other was a young woman from our community. Now, these tragic events, I know my fellow tribal leaders understand, and one of my many differences that is between us and state water managers. State water managers are not having to deal with tragedies like this, but tribal leaders do. So I could not make the Basin Tribes meeting yesterday, but I understand there was discussion among the tribes to sign on to a letter requesting the United States to consider a quote-unquote no impact to tribal rights alternative. Now, this option should be on the table and analyzed, and I think it is something tribal leaders can all agree on. And I'm confident that the community will strongly support it as it continues the tribal effort for more say in the post-2026 process. Now that tribes are more engaged in the post-2026 process, as I expected, there has been pushback from certain non-Indian interests in the basin. Of course, nothing public, but there are whisper campaigns from some of you trying to undermine tribal positions and efforts to try to pit tribes against one another, the old divide and conquer strategy. And I'm not the only one that notices. At last month's 38 Sovereigns meeting, my good friend, President Joaquin from the Kwon Nation, called out what he saw as efforts to sow disagreement between the tribes. And I want to recognize also the president of the Kwon, President Joaquin, and his tribal leadership as well, here as well. They have been strong advocates. They're visionaries also in water policy. I have the utmost respect for him and his leadership, President Joaquin, as I do Vice President Lorelei as well. They're amazing leaders. And I'm so really thankful every time that we go into meetings with the federal government, with the states, with what I call the 38 sovereigns, when I have them there, as well as the other tribal leaders, which are, whether it's from the Colorado River tribes, the great Navajo Nation, the Hopi tribe. It's amazing, the Ute tribes. And again, I want to thank all of the Ute tribes for allowing us, again, to have such an important meeting, conference on your tribal land, on your indigenous Aboriginal land. But really, I know that, that President Joaquin is not on today's panel, but again, I wanted to acknowledge his comments about what he saw as efforts to sow disagreement, sow disagreement between tribes. We as tribal leaders, we recognize these divide and conquer tactics, and I'm confident that they're not going to work. They won't work because at the end of the day, all the basin tribes have a common bond, a historic bond, a sacred bond that trumps, and pardon the word, the Trump, but that trumps the artificial, exactly, that trumps the artificial constructs that non-Indians have and still use to carve up this river. We view, as tribal leaders, as indigenous leaders, as indigenous sovereign nations, we view the world differently than non-Indians. Water is sacred to us, and we recognize our responsibility, our sacred responsibility to steward that resource. Because if we don't, each of us will put our future generations at risk and will cease being a people. I know the representative from Hopi last year said, you know, if we don't fight for the water, he said it right here last year, he said, we're not being who we are as Hopi. That's instinctive to us. We have a shared history where we've had to watch the non-Indian world develop and benefit and exploit our resources. Many of us have had our rights having to do with water and land stolen. Water rights that have been used since time immemorial. And to get some of these rights back, we've had to take deals that eroded our senior water rights or forced us to accept constraints and barriers to fully developing our water rights. Or those tribes that have senior water rights on the river have faced barriers to develop their water rights and face limitations on how they can use their water rights. Water settlements often include, of course, onerous, as we've heard earlier, O&M costs that were designed to dissuade tribes from fully using their water. Many settlements required leases where tribes were forced to give up their rights to non-Indian users for long periods of time right after their settlements were approved. The list of all these inequities that basin tribes have had to face is too long for me to go on and list here. But rest assured, we remind our federal trustee of this history and its responsibility to nonetheless protect our resources. And I believe the United States will, at the end of the day, find ways to protect our resources, and that is something that all basin tribal leaders can get behind. And at the end of the day, I believe basin tribes will stand together and support one another, because one common thing I think you will start hearing from us is that the first peoples of this land should be the last to be cut. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Governor. The Colorado River Indian tribes have a new farm manager. His name is Josh Moore, and he's part Hopi too. And I was privileged to be on a panel at the Family Farm. Was it the Family Farm Alliance? I think for the very first time that they had ever had a tribal panel. And if you know the history or a little bit of the history of the Colorado River Indian tribes in terms of, 3 different tribes coming together and put in Parker, most the way he told the story was because they needed to survive and they needed opportunity, and that's where they went. And so, it's been my pleasure, to work, for at least a decade when I was with the partnership, with Chairman Patch, with now Chairwoman Flores, Amelia Flores, and her brother TJ, who's on the council. And I say all this because they've been engaged in the conversation since I started this 14 years ago, and absolutely have been, stalwart champions of their position in terms of what they want to do with their water and the challenges that they have. And so, unfortunately, Chairwoman Flores couldn't be here with us. Apparently, she's under the weather as well, like Branding Gephardt, I guess. And so, so we have the honor of having the Vice Chairman, Lomayesva, here today, to Dwight de Lomayesva, to talk about, Colorado River Indian tribes and where were you at and where they're at in terms of the negotiation, and congratulations on the ability to be hopefully more self-determined and your ability to do that. So Vice Chairman?
Thank you, Daryl. I'm sorry you got skipped. Thanks, Daryl, and greetings to President Nygren, and congratulations on your new development, you and the Hopi tribe. And Governor Lewis, it's always good to hear your comments, and I agree with most of them anyway. And Vice-Chairwoman Cloud, Lorelei, I have a lot of sympathy for you and your irrigation system because we have the same thing. We have the BIA irrigation system, so I can identify with a lot of the problems that you're having. The comments I'm going to make are, and remarks, I speak from my CRIT experience. I don't pretend to know and understand the experience of other tribes, so everything I'm saying is really from my CRIT experience, Colorado River Indian tribes. But to answer the question posed to this council is how are the 30 sovereign governments participating in ongoing negotiations? Well, our answer is quite simple. We're not participants, not as we would understand it to be anyway. Our engagement is secondhand at best. I'd like to start by stating that we do appreciate the strides that have been made in the past few years regarding the communications and access. The communications and the engagements are different today than they were in the past. The federal tribal state meetings are a valuable forum to discuss ideas and concepts, especially new ideas and new concepts. That way we can explore new ideas and how to solve our problems. So to my federal and state colleagues in the crowd, thank you for your help in making this change where we have more access. Yet, in spite of that, the reality is that the level of engagement, from my perspective, is nowhere near sufficient, given that our water, our livelihoods, our people's future is at stake. Being on the outside looking in is not befitting a sovereign whose ancestors were living along the river and putting water to beneficial use as long before the European settlers even discovered the Colorado River. It is a system that is based on the concept of prior appropriation. In this system, it makes no sense whatsoever. One of the most senior users of the Colorado River in the lower basin, as recognized by the decree in Arizona versus California, we're not at the table talking about sustainable solutions to the crisis at hand. Here are a few facts that maybe shed some light on this point or establish this point. At CRIT, our reservation was established in 1865. That's almost 160 years ago, which is 37 years before the Reclamation Act was established in 1902. It was 47 years before Arizona even became a state. 57 years before the 1922 Colorado River Compact was signed. And it was 103 years before Congress authorized the construction of the Central Arizona Project. CRIT has participated since 2016 in the Colorado River Basin Pilot Program, Conservation Program, and the Lower Colorado River Basin Drought Contingency Plan. We created nearly 205,000 acre-feet of system conservation, storage, in Lake Mead. So we're trying to do our part. We're participating, but we want to make sure that people recognize our rights. We fallowed something like 1,600 acres at one point, and at a later point, we fallowed over 10,825 acres of irrigated cropland each year to satisfy this. CRIT has also created 9,009 acre-feet of extraordinary conservation intentionally created surplus for storage in Lake Mead during the same period. We have done all this. We have participated. Yet here we are, not at the table. Instead, we are totally dependent upon our trustee, the United States government, to protect our interest. The concern we have right now is this, at least one of them, is that our trustee has many different interests that pull in very different directions, having to evaluate and contemplate many actions that may place our senior water rights at risk. Things like evaluating whether they should involuntarily reduce our senior water rights to benefit junior users, something that is in violation of the decree. The decree, and this would turn Winters on its head and set aside the whole concept of prior appropriation. It is something that we oppose, and we will oppose with anything and all means in the future if this should happen. Being at the table would allow us to move this dialogue away from the dangerous ground of involuntarily taking water rights to working with tribal nations who have senior rights to be part of the solution. We want to be part of the solution, but recognize our rights. I realize that other non-tribal water users throughout the basin have similar concerns about not being at the table, yet respectfully, there is one fundamental difference. Crit and other tribal nations are sovereigns. One other point we often hear is that bringing 30 additional parties to the table will stymie the negotiations, which needs to be flexible and nimble, given that 2026 is right around the corner. To that end, why aren't we having a serious conversation about what might work instead of a conversation that starts and stops with no? Potential solutions like having a handful of tribal representatives participate on behalf of the other tribes, all tribes, may be imperfect, but it's better than the current status. In my opinion, it doesn't work. The status quo also tends to lump all tribal nations into one bucket, which is a disservice to all of us. While we have similar interests, each tribal nation is unique and independent from all the others. Our water rights often reflect the unique nature and character of each tribal nation. I think the varying interests of each of our panelists here prove just that. But under the current process, that is the feeling we get, that if it is good for one, it is automatically good for all 30, and that's just incorrect. So to me, tribal participation in the process is more than just an academic question. It's about tribal nations being able to protect what they have for the benefit of future tribal members. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Vice Chairman. And we saved the largest and the tribe that's right in the middle of all this for last, but not really. I want to acknowledge, my friend Bitta Becker. Where are you? Are you here? Yeah, because she and I have worked, doing in this area for 14 years. That's how long. When she said her kid was 18, I was like, what? And so when I found out that she was going to go work potentially for the new president of the Navajo Nation, Dr. Nygren, I was like, well, he must be okay. If she was willing to, to take that on. And so, and again, I applaud the resolve. And the one thing I do want to acknowledge is all my friends at the Navajo Nation in terms of, I remember how proud Crystal Tully Cordova, the principal hydrologist, one of them, was so proud, like they had done all this work internally because they have a Department of Justice that has all Navajo attorneys. They have a water resource department that has engineers that are all Navajo. And the pride of having that capacity all inside and understanding the challenges of the large geography was incredible. It still moves me because, and every time I see Jason John, I'm like, get really happy because, I know what it takes and I know the work that he's done to get to this point. So definitely acknowledge the work that, that's been done over the years and then more specifically, the more recent work. So Dr. Nygren, please.
Yeah, Riyadh in Gilisnis, Anot in Honaiso, Kagido, Tubanat in Gi, yes, a lounge and Jonoban Sahakis, to Harashin the Hawkagi, Hehan Kadini, the last Yego, Shishil, Jun Hen, Hininacha, which Bansida, Kesto, which Nan Nishbekeda, not needy about how the never Washington, the never cave a cow. Hos doha zoje tolga dit al tobin nache anne huinzene de kuigo shibin da sosnishge hehen kedini ral horiya nidia sideje tachi ni sedo nats uzabas chindo todichi ni da sichedo nats uze da chanelen le chetchi da as kan adesha hanya do beti nash engi ya huichin shike des engi beti nash do beti nacha mado jani lengi hehen kedini do horoshi de nevazad kashi horo lagana kachide yesben kichi yashkidole. I just want to say good afternoon to each and every one of you. I just want to say, hey, look, I was teasing my Navajos. I brought my Bass's water, all the way from Window Rock. But I just want to say good afternoon to each and every one of you. And first and foremost, I just want to say thank you to Governor Lewis, Vice-Chairwoman Cloud, Vice-Chairman Dwight. Thank you so much for your leadership, your advocacy, and all the tribal leaders that are in here, that also the tribal leaders that have come before me as well, to continue and to fight for this on a yearly basis. As mentioned earlier, 44 years of this conference of really trying to figure out how can we continue to make sure there's equity, how do we continue to make sure that indigenous country is not forgotten. So I just want to commend each and every one of you, our native partners, our non-native partners, but for your heart and your dedication to really help tribal nations across this country. And I know some of you, as mentioned earlier, when I was listening in just briefly before I went to meet with some students, was the state partners as well. Thank you. I know a lot of this wouldn't be possible if the relationships that we have, the continued dialogues that we have on how do we make sure that we're equitable. I know the tough discussions that are always happening is, yes, we're all American citizens, we're all citizens of a particular state, and yes, we are citizens of our great tribal nations, but at the same time, to remind them that don't forget about us. We've been wanting water for a very long time, so each and every one of you in here, I just want to say thank you for being here, because this is what's important, because the work that you guys do on a day-to-day basis is how do we continue to exist 100 years from now, 200 years from now. And it all starts with water. So again, thank you to my tribal leaders. Thank you to our state officials. Thank you to our state and federal partners for being here with us on this journey as well. So on behalf of the Navajo Nation, I just want to say thank you. And also, I just want to say thank you for the help and the dedication. I know 2 weeks ago, it was an honor to sign a piece of Navajo legislation that was very unanimous. The Navajo Nation Council completely supported it. The Hopi Council supported it. The Southern Paiute supported it. The president of the Southern Paiute, the Hopi chairman, myself, we're very excited to be behind it because it's about time that the three nations in northern Arizona really continue to fight for and what is right for them on how much water that they're going to continue to use into the future. And I think that was very humbling. And I know it took a lot of the work of all the staff, as mentioned earlier, our Navajo Nation Water Resources Department. There is a little baby that's probably a water expert too. Dr. Thule's daughter, or baby. Tasba has been at every meeting. Jason John, of course, Bitta, my chief legal counsel in my office, and at the very beginning, I teased her, are you sure you want to be my chief living counsel or you want to work for DOJ? But she had a really good time working for them. So again, from Madam AG, from the Navajo Nation, everything in between, and all of your friends that really helped make that happen, because it was 4 decades in the making that I'm being told, so well before I was born. So it was considered, and they continue to talk about it. But I'm glad that we really put a lot of effort behind it. And also thank you to the other tribal leaders that are here today, because I'm also the work is not done. I know I want to really send out a letter, personally send a letter out to all the chairmen and the presidents and the governors across the United States to ask for their support as well, to reach out to their congressional delegations, to their governors, to their leaders. And I know my friend over here has got really tied in at the White House. So again, really want to make sure that we make things happen. So if you got friends in high places, really let them know. Let's get Navajo Hopi and Southern Paiute their water. Kent, let's go. I'm also excited that, again, I'm nowhere near a water person. I know that I've really tried to surround myself with people that really have a passion for that as well. But I'm looking forward to the talks that are being talked about today on how do we continue to preserve, how do we continue to exist, and how do we make sure that all the communities that share the river, share the water, that we can be as equitable as possible. So I want to make my remarks that much, and just for some brief history, I know some of us might know Navajo. I know a lot of you probably know Navajo. But I just want to let you guys know that we're well over 400,000 members now. And then we're at 27,000 square miles, 7.5 million acres, and 30% of the homes on Navajo still continue to have no water. So thousands and thousands of our Navajo people still haul water to this day. And some of that water that they drink as we speak, there's probably people, relatives, American citizens that are drinking water that's not supposed to be drank by human beings, but they're drinking it because they've got no other choice. And I know that's why you're here today. Your hearts are all in the right place to make sure that we can make sure that we have water access, clean water to communities such as the Navajo Nation. So I know that's one of those things I think about on a day-to-day basis, because it's just so much out there and so much need that we got to continue to work. And I'm very hopeful. I know it's a big, tremendous goal that we have to try to get this through this Congress in the next several months, and actually to have President Biden sign off on. I know it's a very hefty goal, but I know that you guys all, like as I mentioned earlier, talk to your representatives, your senators, your people, and really if you could make that phone call to help us make this happen, because we got to make sure that there's water for the Hopi, the Southern Paiute, and the Navajo people on the Arizona side moving forward. And again, I just want to continue to thank all the people that worked on this, because no one ever thought that we were going to be in 2024, that the Navajo, the Hopi, and the Southern Paiute are going to come together to actually agree on something. And we did it. The reason why we did it, too, is because we realized that we share that space together. We realize that there's a lot of intermarriage. There's Navajo is married to Hopi. There's Navajo is married to Southern Paiute, vice versa. And we make up the whole part of northern Arizona, and we might as well come together and really build a future for our communities into the future, because that's what's important as all tribal leaders as we sit here is we want our people to live on their own ancestral lands. We want our people to thrive and want to live on our reservations and help them to help us take care of our lands so that we can enjoy the lands just as our great-great-grandparents enjoyed our lands in the past. So, and that's a huge, tremendous goal of ours on our end. Again, it's the water that we're talking about. Navajo is very unique, as mentioned earlier, the upper basin, the lower basin. We're trying to ask for 44,700 acre feet of water, 90% of Arizona's upper basin allocation. And we're trying to ask for $5 billion too. I know the past 2 days I was in DC. I took my favorite red eye from Phoenix to DC, and I made my rounds with Hopi Chairman, the president of Southern Paiute, and a few Navajo Nation Council delegates, but to really remind them that this is a settlement, you know what I mean? We're asking for the bare minimum so that we can have an opportunity to secure our future, to be able to make sure that we can build out infrastructure, we can build out the economy. Not only does it benefit the Navajo, the Hopi, and the Southern Paiute, but it benefits the state of Arizona, it benefits the great United States of America, and everything in between. So I know that's a very ambitious task that we got ahead of ourselves over the next several months, but really looking forward to. I know that we had we met with about 80 to 90% of our Arizona delegation. They're excited about it. We're very confident on the Senate side. We really want to, we're trying to build that same confidence on the House side and really try to continue to push that through as well too. So again, in conclusion, I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your support. Thank you for everything that you do in terms of water, whether you work for a state, or whether you work for the federal government, or you work for a tribal nation. We've got friends all around. End of the day, we want to make sure that we can continue to be all successful, because end of the day, we're all five-finger people. And end of the day, we consider ourselves friends and relatives, because you never know, you might down the road, one of your great-great-grandkids might be a member of the Southern Paiute, a member of the Gila River, a member of the Creek, or a member of the Navajo Nation. So you never know where our relatives or our extensions are going to extend into the future. So we might as well set ourselves up for the future so that we can all benefit from it. So with that, and thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Mr. President. And yeah, I think BITA made a good decision. It looks like we're going to have some time for some questions, but I just wanted to say real quickly that, there was a side bet that we couldn't get 4 tribal leaders to stay within an hour of time.
We did it. Yeah.
And our moderator.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, I guess that's my cue with that happy note. Nice. Thanks so much again for folks who are putting content into the Slido queue. We appreciate it. The additional thing is, if you look at that queue and there are questions that resonate with you, that you want to have the panelists engage in, please give them a thumbs up. It really helps us in determining what's most useful for discussion. There's no question about the most popular question so far in the queue. It dovetails with remarks earlier today from federal officials, basin state principals, and the tribal representatives, tribal officials up there. In regards to tribal involvement in Colorado River management, what does that look like in a successful forum? What do you think is most necessary for the federal trustee or representatives of the federal trustee and representatives of the basin states to understand about what it means to include tribes?
Good.
I'll go first. I think that's a really good question. I think, so earlier you saw the 7 basin states sitting up here, but there wasn't a federal representative up here as well either. And so I think there's somebody has to be in that forum representing the tribal voice. So we're still lacking tribal inclusion. Even today, as we sit here, when we talk about having tribes being part of the solution, that has got to be part of it. But the other part, I think, is also that everybody in the basin has to understand, and they have to understand that the upper basin lives within the hydrology. In order for us to have a sustainable river system, everybody has to live within the hydrology. It's not just the upper basin, it's everyone. And so I also wanted to say something. I know J.B. Hamby made a comment about the city of Los Angeles. You know, their reality is they have more people than the rest of the upper basin. That doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that they can still continue to use more water than everybody else. I don't believe that it's sustainable for my people to suffer for other people to have water, when I know that my people, just like Navajo Nation, we have to haul water to parts of our reservation for our families to have water. For them to decide if do they wash clothes today? Do they take a shower today? You know, they have to make those decisions on a daily basis. So I don't believe that it's sustainable for everybody to say, well, you know, we get to use this amount of water because that's what the law says. It's not right. It's not right for those that are suffering to continue to suffer or make those harder decisions to make those decisions to cut back when we know others aren't willing to do that. So I think when we talk about the success and tribal inclusion, tribes have got to be part of the solution because, again, we have a large allocation of that water, but also tribes have to also be part of we have to be part of those conversations, but we also have to be able to make the decisions that are best for our people and use the water and get over those hurdles that are preventing us from using our water.
Thank you so much. Other tribal leaders, please feel free.
All right, I'll be glad to start here. You know, the 5 tribes that live right along on the Colorado River, our reservation, as a matter of fact, the river runs right in the middle of a reservation for I think it's close to 120 miles. And we have been there forever, even before the reservation was established, we've been there. As a matter of fact, they moved us from the Blythe-Ehrenberg area. Our ancestors are moved from there up to where the Colorado River is right now. But what we're asking for is that the solution to this at least recognize that we have a protected, decreed rights to the water. And any violation of that based on involuntary reducing our senior water rights and ignoring the priority system, I think that'd be a step in the wrong direction. We would like to see that put high up on the table. That should be recognized by anybody that makes a decision as to where this water is going to go.
Okay, Governor Liu, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Really, if I can just jump into this, the 38 sovereigns, that was a good solid step forward. I think tribes, when we're given the opportunity and the resources, we can bring innovation. Commissioner Tootin, she highlighted our solar panels over canals, the first in the Western Hemisphere. And it was done by our sovereign tribe with the resources and the technical support and the partnership with the federal government. You know, we have almost 200 miles of canals that we could potentially ramp up solar panels that would protect against evaporation and that would really realize a goal that I have for our community to be the first net zero community in the United States. Now, that type of innovation, right, that is something that tribes really have to have the pathway for. I know certain tribes have a limitation of resources. So I think it's also incumbent on the federal government to provide those technical assistance opportunities to tribes. I really appreciated Commissioner in her open remarks about finally bringing the next step for Bucket 2 proposals. Now, the Gila River Indian community, we were the first ones to bring Bucket 2 proposals in regards to Arizona because we know that the Colorado River is stressed out, that beautiful life-giving source, especially in respect to those on river users. We're looking for new opportunities for new potential sources of water in Arizona. We're also looking back at our namesake, our Kutiakamal as well. You know, we're looking at ways where we can be more efficient in bringing more Gila River, our namesake water, to our community as well. Of course, you know, we've had, and I told you, it's 20 years since our historic water settlement. I see there's a representative general counsel from the Thana-Atham Nation as well, in the back as well. And so we are tied to that Arizona Water Settlement Act, both the Gila River Indian community and the Thana-Atham Nation, sister tribes. But, you know, what we're looking at as well, though, you know, is our water is still getting stolen. There's still ongoing theft in the upper valley of Arizona. And that is a significant taking of our water, of a violation of federal law. Our water settlement, the Arizona Water Settlement Act, is federal law. And so one of my goals, and I said this at my inauguration, my 4th inauguration, I said, we're gonna put all of those non-Indian water users who are stealing our water, we are going to put them out of business once and for all, to upholding and protecting the sanctity of our water settlement. So, so if, even with water settlements, water theft, our water is still being stolen from us. So we're still in protection mode as well. At the same time, both, and I really appreciate, Vice-Chairwoman Mueller was saying, we were the first ones. We were the first ones to answer the call in Bucket 1 proposals, those water conservation opportunities. It was tribes that were the ones that stepped up for the benefit of the whole basin system, right? When we were looking at perilous water hydrology reports in the basin, and it was tribes, they were the first ones that came and answered the call to protect the bottoming out of the elevations in Lake Mead and Lake Powell. So, so tribes, of course, we all have, and as was said, right, there's 30 tribes in the basin. If you know one tribe, if you know 30 tribes, you just know, one tribe. Everyone has their specific story. And most of the stories are sad. They are of colonization. They are of genocide, stories of theft. Over 150 years ago, we were, as a community, our water was taken from us, stolen from us. The water did not flow in the Gila River. We were almost put to the extinction factor in regards to there was no more water for us, and so we were almost pushed to really be pushed to the edge of potential potential extinction. At the same time, the federal government, they had plans to move us, a forced removal, to move us to Oklahoma. So it was the tenacity when we talk about of our leaders, of those leaders, whether it was my late father or leaders before us. We trace back to our traditional leadership as well. Our last traditional leader is Chief Antonio Azul, and he was not only, and he had to be a military strategist. He had to be a diplomat. He had to be a water negotiator, and it's kind of interesting, almost 200 years later, us as leaders, we are having to do the same thing again, potentially in regards to the taking of our water, and in regards to a potential attack on tribal sovereignty. And thank you, Ms. Lorelei Cloud, Vice Chair, for recognizing the 100-year anniversary of the Indian Citizen Act, citizens on our own land. Right? It's that type of cruel irony that we're dealing with and that we're continuing to deal with here even now in regards to, to the negotiations that are going on. And that's why when we look at achievements, we need to value those. We need to celebrate those, such as, the achievement along the Colorado River with the CRIT water marketing bill, with the historic water rights for the Navajo, Hopi, and the San Juan Paiutes as well. These are things that we need to hold up and we need to celebrate, and we need to use this as momentum. When we talk about a seat at the table, we need to use these as a momentum to further protect our tribal water rights all along the upper basin and the lower basin. One thing I want to tell my tribal leaders: we cannot get divided. Whether you're an upper basin or a lower basin tribe, we are all sovereign nations. Water is a trust resource. The federal government has a sacred trust responsibility to protect those resources, our land and our water. And we cannot, in this process, whether it's leading up to the post-2026 or beyond, we cannot let ourselves get divided once again, right? During westward expansion, we were conquered by the divide and conquer strategy. We can't let that happen again here in the midst of what we're dealing with in regards to water policy, making sure that there's a responsible water policy, making sure that all things, whether it's federal legislation to be enacted or the ongoing negotiations. That is my message. If I can leave anything to our tribal leadership here and all the 30 tribes along the basin. Thank you.
I want to say thank you, Governor. And
Just real quick, Mr. President, I just want to tell everybody we're going to go till 2:40 just because we got started later. Sorry.
okay, but yeah, again, I just want to say thank you to the other tribal leaders. I definitely agree with their comments. And the only thing I want to add too is on the Navajo Nation side, I think it's just really continuing to ask our federal partners to not only, I know in the leadership level, they definitely understand some of our unique needs, but trying to trickle that down into the lifelong employees that work for the federal government so that they can continue to understand the tribe's unique needs as they continue to work with us. And also, I know a little bit about the legislation that will be going through Congress very soon is we're hoping to have the ability to move water within the Navajo Nation, whether it's Arizona, New Mexico, or Utah, because the Navajo Nation sits in a unique area where it takes 5 hours to go one way, 5 hours to go to the other way, but just having that opportunity and having that authority to move water within the Navajo Nation, I think that's going to be good because we'll be able to make sure that we can raise our children, make sure that there's an opportunity to have a thriving economy. So that's the only thing I wanted to add, but I definitely agree with my colleagues.
Let me,
Time for one more.
Thank you so much. So the next question is really specific to the ongoing NEPA process. So as mentioned earlier, there's a draft environmental impact statement that's being prepared that alternatives are being considered in relation to. And the question is just a request to hear more about the no impact on tribal water rights alternative that it sounds like at least some of the basin tribes are interested in having the federal trustee analyze in that NEPA process.
Great question.
if I remember right, in the NEPA process, it suggests a reasonable alternative. And I think if you consider involuntarily taking water from those of us who have priority decreed water rights, that is not a reasonable alternative. So that would be my comment on that.
Other leaders? Do we have time for one more question then, Daryl? Yeah. All right. The final question relates or connects to comments made about the 10 Tribes Partnerships vision statement. That's the way I think about it. And the idea of Colorado River management coming from a spiritual mandate or reflecting a spiritual mandate. Can you please give us a glimpse of what a tribal-centric approach to restoration, perhaps protection too, of the Colorado River might look like, whether that involves water leasing, in-stream flow rights, or other specifics?
So I guess I'll start. So there's current barriers to tribes, like leasing water, marketing water, because we can't lease, again, past state lines. So for the Southern Ute and Ute Mountain, we'd have to become very, very creative in what that looks like, because we sit at the bottom of the state of Colorado. So that is very limited on what we can do as far as leasing. And so that type of barrier really inhibits us, again, using our water. So I want to talk a little bit more about Ute Mountain, because their reservation is also in New Mexico and in Utah. And they really need their water in both of those two other states, but they can't use their Colorado water in Utah or in New Mexico, even though it's their same reservation. And so barriers like that not just inhibit the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, but other reservations as well too. And so there's all these different barriers that have got to be addressed in order for tribes to be able to put their water to use that is in the best benefit for their own people. And tribes are the only ones that can make those decisions. We can't rely on somebody else to make those decisions for us. Again, it's the paternal aspect of the government keeping the Native people as wards of the states. And so we need to change that kind of concept of the way that the government views and basically deals with us. And so, again, this is our homeland. We're not going anywhere. So we need to be able to create some type of mechanism, whatever that may be, in order to create a partnership. Tribes are willing to be partners, as you have seen in past actions by the other tribes here. And so how do we do that? Again, we're just going to have to be a little bit more creative on those solutions. I also think that for Southern Ute, again, our water is settled and quantified. And so we have a very different perspective on how we can use our water. I want, me particularly, being also on the Colorado Water Conservation Board, I want to keep Colorado's water in Colorado. So that's keeping Ute water in Colorado and Ute water in Ute country. That's my main priority. And because our people have gone without water for such a very long time, and everybody else has been able to use our water for free because we are uncompensated for our unused tribal water. And so that has to be something else that has to be discussed in these forums that we're talking about, in order for tribes, again, to be partners. Because it's very unfair for tribes to be uncompensated for the unused tribal water when everybody else that doesn't use their water gets compensated. So we also know that unused tribal water is what's propping up the system now. Again, it's water that we are uncompensated for. And so all of these different layers here that we're talking about all build up into why we're sitting here in this room having this conversation, again, because tribes haven't been included for such a very long time. 100 years of us being citizens in our own country is just a part of it. And so you have to, in order to create something, we have to recognize the past, fix those barriers in order for us to move forward, because we're not going anywhere. We will continue to be here, and we will continue to fight and continue to voice our opinion until tribes are it's normalized for us to be part of those decisions.
Well, it looks like the matriarchy is going to have the last word today. And so let's give this great panel a big hand. Thank you. And the break will be until 3 o'clock.
All right. Wow. Thank you for coming back. All right, we're going to continue our discussion. We're done thinking through a sovereign lens, and we're going to have a panel looking through a more sectoral lens. And to continue the tradition from most of the day, I am again going to do my job by delegating my job to someone who's better at it than me. And so running this panel will be John Fleck, who many of you know, author of everything from influential books to his must-read blog. So, John, they already know who you are. Take it away.
It's always embarrassing to me when the blog comes up and you all know about my weird bike rides. But it's my blog, right? So it's a blog. So I'd like to thank you all for coming back. I very much have enjoyed what we have been hearing this morning. But there's a really interesting difficulty that each one of the... It's on, okay, I'll lean in. So very much been enjoying what we've been hearing this morning, but there's a bit of a difficulty where each one of the sovereigns, the states and the tribes, have a sort of geographic focus, which is important. But we wanted to, for this panel, step back and try to look from a different perspective, a different lens, a sectoral focus on the different ways we clump and think about and use water for different sort of cultural purposes. And we have 3 panelists. I'm not going to do the full introduction, but Adele Hushkhalil from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, whose job is to think about municipal water supplies. Andy Mueller, who's a big part of his job is thinking about ensuring water supply for rural communities doing agricultural, irrigation, with it, and Karen Kwon, who thinks about things from an environmental perspective, each one of whom has to think about the other things, and each one of whom also has to think often in geographical terms. So we're going to sort of give each one a chance to talk about their view of sort of what we expect, what these sectors hope from the post-2026 guidelines, and then we'll be have you all have a chance to ask questions. So I'm going to start. There was a great deal of discussion about the proper ordering for this.
I lost.
Yeah, Karen lost. I'm going to start with Karen Kwon.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me here. It's nice to be back at CU and see a lot of familiar faces and hopefully friendly faces as well. The question kind of posed to us is what would we want to see in the rules? And as John said, I coordinate a bunch of NGO groups that are conservation groups, have similar interests on the river. And so I'm probably not going to be able to effectively speak to the details of the ecosystem and environmental components, but coordinating it and thinking about it from a number of different angles is kind of where I'm coming from. And in that capacity, what do we want to see in the rules? I think we need to recognize where we are and compare it to where we were in 2007. We have experienced a lot in that time frame, including bad hydrology, and we've experienced what to expect as a result of bad hydrology, and knowing that we can't anticipate what the hydrology is going to be. We also have new tools that we can put into place to address our concerns and meet our needs. We have new hope in restoration projects. We've got a lot of examples. There's some postcards out front if you want to see some of those examples. We have some of the economy is changing as a result of this, and we're experiencing that. And as we have seen through the sovereign discussion this morning, as we'll see tomorrow, and as we're seeing today, we have a lot more active interests who are attuned to what's going on in the basin and what's going to happen from the basin. And with that, what we're going to require from these rules, whatever these rules turned out to be, we're going to have them be forward-looking. We're going to have to be open-minded a little bit to be problem-solving, and we're going to need to be innovative in our approach for the rules of the game. And what are the rules of the game? Your guess is as good as mine, but I think there's two components. I've been trying to think of an analogy. Is it two sides of the same coin? Is it the hand in the glove? I don't know, you pick your analogy. But the first part is the rules themselves. We have a lot, I've worked with a number of people who were on the panels before, and I do not doubt their capacity or their passion for trying to problem solve what needs to be done. What's the solution for the math problem, for the mass balance problem, for the sharing and living within the river problem? That is it's a very complex question with a lot of different angles, and it needs to be done. It absolutely needs to be done, because I don't have any confidence that 9 robes in Washington, D.C. can do it better than our basin can. That is important. So the what is important, but that is not enough. We also need to figure out how we're going to do it. And that, I think, has been a little bit missing from the conversation right now. So what's important to see in the rules is not just the what, but the how. And by that, I mean, we need to, as we have heard, address the historical exclusion of the tribes. That's part of the how. And the how also is, I think, more than just talking about keeping storage in the reservoirs, which is very important, but recognizing that the Colorado River system is the foundation to everything that we're talking about in the river. We're here because of the resources and because of the Colorado River itself, and we need to maintain the integrity of that when we're figuring it out. So they need to be embedded in the rules in some ways. It's not that everything happening in the basin needs to be solved by the rules, but there are things when you are imposing and developing rules, how you're doing it, you need to consider the Colorado River as the integrity of the system. And how do you do that? Well, you can factor in mitigation and stewardship principles in the rules themselves as you can. I think some of the 7 state principles identified that we're really going to need to understand what the impacts of the rules are, whatever those rules are. and wherever those impacts are, because we're going to have to mitigate them. We have to have a robust mitigation, a robust impact analysis so that we can then identify what's the appropriate mitigation. And even before we get to mitigation, there are opportunities to just be better stewards as we're managing and implementing operations in the river system. Whether it be, I think, I've heard some of the Jicarilla tribal representatives acknowledge that this is no longer a one-use water system. We need to maximize and optimize the uses of our water, not only for people, but also for natural systems in the basin. And to do that, I think you need to have innovative approaches and an open-minded thinking on how you might be able to keep more water in PAL so you can guarantee that water can go through the Grand Canyon and sustain those resources as you get it to Lake Mead. Maybe you have exchange systems. I know it really tweaks out the law of the river, and I'm not saying break the law of the river, but we've been pretty good at bending it before, and we just need to make sure it's flexible enough to do that. So I think that factoring in mitigation and stewardship is important. Integrating these innovative strategies, coming up with these innovative strategies, having the room and the space to identify innovative strategies is important. And then also demonstrating the regard for the diverse values and the rights and honor the rights on the system. And that's easy, these are words. It's easy for everybody to say, but how do you do it? I don't think anybody has the corner on the market on that solution. But I think what we've tried to do, the collective groups of people that I've been coordinating, is we try to propose an alternative to be considered for the post-2026 guidelines, not because it has to be the alternative, but it broadens the conversation beyond the upper basin, lower basin elements to be able to expand the analysis to allow us to have the broad conversations we need to think about what will work for rules going forward. And what I mean by that is I think the sovereigns, the 38 sovereigns in their own way, need to figure out the math problem. But how they do that, they can do it by potentially making sure we're not going from crisis to crisis management, that we actually are able to figure out and know what to expect going forward, that we are able to find ways to allow for tools for saving and conserving water that provides for this multiple use opportunity. Maybe a conservation reserve, maybe improving the ICS program, maybe having upper basin conservation in a way that works for the benefit of them while it helps the system. All of those kind of things can be boiled or baked into these kind of concepts. And then I think you're going to need to also recognize, so that's the hand in a way. We also need to recognize that for this alternative, we've had an opportunity to maybe also consider Mexico. Mexico is not in the guidelines. That's a separate discussion, as Commissioner Salmon had identified through a minute. But what we can agree to will affect operations in Lake Powell and Lake Mead, what we can agree to in a minute. So we would need to have that NEPA analysis done. So we would like to have it broad enough to be able to at least consider what we can talk about with Mexico. So allowing maybe some releases to the Delta, or considering some salinity impacts, or things like that, so that then we can have the conversation with Mexico. And finally, I would say so that's the hand, but now we need the glove, because this is all great, but whatever we decide to have in these rules will not save the basin by themselves. It will operate the facilities and maybe keep them going and maybe give us some water, but the challenge that's facing us right now in the basin is not that. The challenge is climate change and drought, and it's throughout the basin. And whatever those rules are, I think we've all learned that we're probably gonna have to cut somewhere, and somebody's gonna have some effects. We need to build resilience in the basin, separate, concurrent, as I think Commissioner Tutin said, concurrent, or parallel, or alongside of, I don't pick the word, but they go hand in glove. We need to broaden the dialogue to be able to have conversations about how to build the resilience in the basin. And I sure hope the rules of the game will allow us to do that. Because what I've heard, so for example, Vice-Chairwoman Lorelei Cloud mentioned, we've been relying on water, undeveloped water without compensation. I've heard a lot of, well, we're doing this without compensation, or we're gonna need compensation, and I wholeheartedly agree. I don't discount that at all. But somebody needs to be doing the compensating. We need funding, and it's not going to be the funding solely of IRA and BIL, those are going to go away here in a while. But I don't think the problems of the basin or the challenges of the basin are going to go away as quickly. So we're going to need to start thinking about in the glove that goes with the guidelines and the rules of how to build the resilience, build funding for, or a framework for ecosystem restoration, have funding for ICS and conservation reserve programs in both the upper basin and the lower basin, have funding in ways that will allow us to be able to address the impacts that we're going to feel as a result that I think all of us are at least needing to anticipate could happen. That I know we had a really good 2023, but as everybody says, one good year does not make a basin. And I've heard that we need 8 years of 2023 to maybe rebuild storage to the full capacity. We're not going to get there anytime soon. And if we want to do this in a way that we're allowing our future generations as well as our current generations to go forward, we're going to need to have a resilience programming concept, building in the programs alongside the guidelines. So we want the guidelines and the rules of the game to not get in the way of that, but maybe actually promote and advance it. So I would say that for me, the rules of the game are twofold. And don't forget that it's not just the math problem. It is also the how to get to the solutions of the math problem. And make sure that we remember the integrity of the environment as a process to that. And in doing that, we need to build the resilience in the basin going forward as well. So, thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Adele.
Great. You changed the order on me. Thank you very much. And it's great to be with you. And it's an honor to be among a lot of diverse interest groups for the river. But I think we all share one thing in common, right? We care for the environment, we care for the health of our communities, we care for the tribes, we care for our future and resiliency. This is what brings us together. And I usually should have my other pen that says we are one. And I've been advocating for it across our California, but across the entire Southwest, that we are one. If one of us is not taken care of, we're not taken care of. And I believe wholeheartedly in that effort and that communication. In Metropolitan, we're leading the way in that effort. And that's not just Metropolitan, it's the entire lower basin. The entire California has an ethic of collaboration, an ethic of conservation, an ethic of trying to adapt to the climate change. I'm going to talk to you about what we're doing also in Metropolitan. We are leading an effort doing climate adaptation master planning. We know things are different. And if we don't prepare, we're going to be victims to nature and the hydrology. And I don't think we should be. I mean, to me, we can't say we're dependent on the hydrology. It doesn't matter. What we need to do is take action by our own hands and plan for it. We can't just operate with a paradigm of scarcity and things are being reduced, because that brings us against each other, right? And I think I want to just bring a paradigm of surplus and creating more surplus and creating more new ideas and augmenting our water supply. That's the only way for us to really adapt to this change. Find better ways to manage water. It's adaptive management, and that's what we're doing in Metropolitan, and I'll share that with you. To me, our goal, Metropolitan's goal, but I think we all share that together, ensuring safe, reliable water for all with no one left behind is something that unites all of us. No one left behind means communities, urban communities, tribes, environment, everyone is no one left behind, upper basin, lower basin. Nobody should be left behind. And if we have anybody left behind, we haven't done our job. So with that overarching goal, I think we can start working together, and we need to trust each other. And you saw the 7 representatives from the states, actually 6 plus Brandon. But to me, there is a need to rebuild that trust, rebuild the trust to make sure everybody's taken care of. And we need to do it together. So the river supports, Metropolitan was created 100 years ago, and it was created to build the Colorado Aqueduct. We brought water from the Colorado River into Metropolitan, into the service area. Now it's 20 million people, the 11th largest economy in the world, close to $2 billion in GDP. And what we need to do is figure out how we support our community and what we're doing. It doesn't mean we take more water. It doesn't, but we need to sustain that economy, that future. As we are committed to supporting our ag partners across the entire region, supporting our tribal partners, but also supporting the environment. We need to do it together. So we've taken our responsibility seriously. We've done a lot of work in Metropolitan. We have reduced our water consumption. Our water use today is the same as it was 50 years ago, with double the population. That's not just taking things and saying, you know, whatever water gets, let's just keep using. We've taken actions. We've invested over $2 billion in conservation and invested the same amount of money in local water supply projects. Our member agencies have spent a lot of money to ensure resiliency. San Diego County Water Authority spent billions in building the desal plant. We've built Diamond Valley Lake in Riverside. It's a 800,000 acre feet storage facility that we built in 2000. That's basically was a lifeline. We are, in Orange County, we have the largest recycled water programs in the entire nation, 130 million gallons a day of recycled water. Last October, we partnered with Antelope Valley East Kern to build a storage system it's called the High Desert Storage in Lancaster. It's 300,000 acre feet of underground storage, as big as Lake Castaic, if you know what Lake Castaic is. And we're able to put water in from the state water project when we have surplus water, store it, and when we need water, we can pull it out. We're actually rebuilding our infrastructure. You know, we are trying to build an infrastructure resilient that moves water around. We're talking to our groundwater agencies to find ways that we can utilize our groundwater basins. One, protecting the groundwater basins, the water quality, and protecting the communities that use groundwater. And we're working with Compton, with San Fernando to ensure their wells are still active and able to get the water. And that's why we're committed to water quality. But at the same time, finding partnerships that when we have water available, we can put it down in the system, in the groundwater basins, whether it's from recycled water or from rain or from surplus water that we have from the different systems we have. LA County has introduced an LA County water plan. And part of that water plan is establishing additional 550,000 acre feet of local water supply by 2045. That's a huge commitment. And that's going to be dovetails into our water action plan that we're doing. When I was in the city of Los Angeles, we advocated and we were able to successfully get the ratepayers to tax themselves for Measure W, which is a taxation for stormwater capture based on the drainage you have in your area, to take that money and build projects across the entire county to capture stormwater and put it in the ground. We are doing everything we can. And last week, we had the Bureau of Reclamation provide us $100 million as a down payment on the efforts we're doing for Pure Water Southern California. The largest, once completed, will be the largest recycled water project in the country, providing water for 150,000 million gallons a day of water, but also enough for 50,000 households. It's about resiliency and about how we build, but conservation is a way of life. We've committed to conservation. We've invested in conservation. Our water use is 40% less, and we continue to advocate. We're given $3 a square foot for converting your turf into native California-friendly plants. We just added a new, what we call tree bait, to add 5 more trees to capture water, create tree canopy, and be responsible. And that's all part of our also climate action plan that we're doing to ensure that we are dealing with this in an environmentally sound and we're reducing our carbon footprint. We're investing in the Delta. We're investing in ways to protect the habitat in the Delta. But also we're opening communication with our partners. In 2003, I know J.B. Hamby talked about it, you know, during the quantification settlement agreement 20 years ago, we're able to reduce California's water use by 800,000 acre feet. Half of it was metropolitan. And what we did is through partnerships with ag partners, find ways to do on-farm conservations. And the work we need to do, we worked with the tribes, the Quechan tribe, President Joaquin was here earlier. And we worked with the Bard Irrigation District to do some seasonal farming. Some people call it seasonal fallowing, I call it seasonal farming, to farm when during the wintertime when the vegetables are of value, and during the summer you don't have to farm, and that water can go into storage. But the good thing about Bard Irrigation District, that money that we pay them from Metropolitan, they used it to invest in their infrastructure. They lined their canals. They put new technology to better manage their water distribution. Those are things that we need to continue. That's the circular economy. We need to continue working through it. But I'll tell you, I mean, the Imperial Irrigation District has done amazing work in their on-farm conservation, and more can be done. But we are committed to the protection of the communities in the farms. The farms are part of our future, and we agree that we need to do more conservation. But at the same time, we can't starve those communities. The same thing with the Palo Verde Irrigation District. We're working with them. We have partnership. We own land, but we're looking at new ways to farm. We call it regenerative farming, and we have partnership with the universities and others to do research. We're doing that at the same time we're investing in community benefits, because also we know that by not farming, you have impact on the communities they serve. So we have an agreement and putting money in the community benefit to support the communities in Palo Verde Irrigation District. When we faced 2021-22 was not easy. We had zero allocation coming from the State Water Project. We had almost came to a crash when it came to the Colorado River. And it was a rude awakening for all of us. We almost ran out of water for Metropolitan, the storage. But also what was weak is the conveyance system. We didn't have the flexible conveyance system to move water around. And our board committed to taking on a climate adaptation master plan to determine what is that blueprint to help us be adaptive. And we're investing a lot of money. It's going to cost us a lot of money. We just did a budget about a month ago. We'd increase our rates by almost 8.5%. But for the first time since 1990, we actually increased our ad valorem property tax by $2 to $3 a month to pay and create a fixed investment. And also we're looking at a new business model. What's the future look like? Because in our last 100 years, it was about selling water. Metropolitan cannot be about selling water anymore. It's about investing in water, about creating new water. It's about protecting water. And that cannot be tied to a sale. The revenue I have cannot be based on selling water. It just doesn't work. I'm giving money to people not to use water at the same time. So I'm trying to find a new business model to continue sustaining the investments in resiliency while we continue doing what we need to do in conservation. But I want to open the door to bigger discussion. I know we're going to 2026 and beyond. We need to trust each other. The lower basin have done amazing work together. I mean, the water we're using, and you heard Tom talk about it here in what we've done at lower basin. I think our water use is from the Colorado River is the lowest since 1980. I think for our California is the lowest since 1949. We've done a lot of work, but more needs to be done. We're not saying that. That's why we agreed to do the 1.5 million acre feet. You heard John talk about it earlier. 1.3 was the deficit, but we added more to it for climate adaptation. But the question is how we move forward across the entire region. Nobody has the rights to wastewater, even if you have the water rights to it, right? For me, that's a critical element. It doesn't mean I have the water rights, I can do anything I want with it, right? So every time I drive anywhere, I see somebody with sprinklers flying everywhere and nothing is happening, I kind of almost have a heart attack. And my daughter hates it because when I go for a walk with her, she's my future lawyer, and I see somebody, I said, I'm going to knock on the door here. And she goes, no, don't embarrass me. Don't. But anyway, we all have to stand and be responsible for what we need to do. But we need to look at ways to do exchanges between ourselves. So we're talking about exchanges between metropolitan partners. We have agreements with the Central Basin. They have issues with groundwater basins and the settlement they're doing. We're looking at ways that we can put our excess water in their system to help their settlement, but also create water supply. So we're not fighting over water, whether it's in Delta or in the Colorado River. But also we have partnership on our recycled water with Arizona and Nevada. But imagine if we make that tent bigger and allow for exchanges between all of us. You talked about needing money beyond the IRA, beyond what we're doing. I know it's gonna, that well will dry up. And I appreciate the Bureau of Reclamation and the leadership for the Bureau of Reclamation and the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan bill. And Camille has been amazing and her team doing that work. And that's the lifeline we got besides the nature lifeline. The Bureau of Reclamation lifeline is helping us kind of stand up, but we can't do it. We have to do it together. So imagine if we all share and create reservoirs of water and reservoirs of money, and we decided where to invest that money, whether it's in Mexico, in Arizona, in Utah, in Colorado, or Southern California. And we all share in the benefit. The tribes can benefit from it. The environment can benefit from it. But we all figure out how we put the money in. But that requires us to be able to exchange water across state boundaries. So that flexibility has to happen. Plus also, I think more storage is needed. More storage. And we need to open the door for more storage in Lake Mead. Because storage in Lake Mead helps us all shore up the lake, and we don't have to fight over the water. If we have more water stored, it helps us all. So the same thing, we can create storage everywhere. So it's going to take all of us working together. It's going to take all of us trusting each other, but also sharing in the investments. It cannot be on the backs of few. It can be leaving somebody out. We all have to be at the table, agreeing to how to move forward. And our strength is in our unity. And I still think it's important to work together and move. So I'm very optimistic. It's very hard, very challenging. It's very hard in my area, which is not a small area, but we're trying to figure out the future, how we're going to exchange, how we're going to move water, how we're going to pay for things. But I think we can do it for the entire region as a whole, because we need to rebuild our future, and it cannot be based on tapping the river all the time. We need to find ways that we can augment the river for the benefits of all and continue our resiliency, our future. It takes all of us working together. It's going to take all of us collaborating, because, individually is one drop, right? And if we are together, we're an ocean. And let's collaborate and get together to create a lot more water for the future without harming our environment, harming our tribes, harming each other, and figure out how we can live together and invest in the future of resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy.
Well, thank you. I don't know. I mean, Adele just talked about the importance of agriculture, and I think he's got it, so thank you. So I just want to first introduce, Andy Mueller, the general manager at the Colorado River District, and we represent about 30% of the physical landmass of the state of Colorado, and we're charged with protecting, developing, and conserving the water of the headwaters of the Colorado within our state for our inhabitants, and for the environment that is present there. We are a primarily rural district, and so we focus a lot on agriculture, but I want to be really clear about something. I'm not a producer. I'm not a farmer. I'm not a rancher. In fact, when I was contacted about this, I suggested several other names that would be appropriate to talk about agriculture. But I'm here. So I think it's important, and I think it's really important that agriculture is understood in the context of the entire basin, and in the context of the fact that we all do depend upon each other to survive and thrive. And it's really critical that we look at it that way. But I maybe let you, like where I'm coming from, I think is important as I speak. So our district has policies, like many, and one of our policies that has been around the longest is about agriculture. And it's a critical component of Western Colorado's economy, environment, and the community. The district supports and promotes Western Colorado agriculture and will partner with agricultural interests to ensure a vibrant agricultural sector in Western Colorado. So I can add to that in the context of today's discussion. Agriculture in our state and the basin is incredibly connected. Our food products from Western Colorado end up over here on the Front Range all the time. We depend on agricultural products from the Imperial Irrigation District, from Yuma, Arizona, from the Front Range of Colorado. Our cattle don't get processed unless they come over this way, generally speaking. we don't want any part of the basin's agriculture to be so deprived of the basic building block of water that it disproportionately suffers harm. And I think that's a really key issue. But agriculture in our basin is not a monolithic endeavor, right? If you look at my district, the average farm size is 200 acres. And 90% of those, 5 years ago when we did some studies on it, 90% of that ag is owner operated, right? Those are mom and pop shops, most of whom have jobs outside the farm to support their habit of farming. Now, that is a really important habit because of a lot of reasons, but it is very different than some of the agriculture, say, again, in the Imperial Irrigation District. I think there was a really, frankly, unfair piece in ProPublica singling out 5 families in the Imperial Irrigation District that own a significant portion of the agricultural lands there. And those 5 families produce an amazing amount of food for our entire country. And yes, they also produce alfalfa, right? And alfalfa, I love when I can find times that I agree with JB on things. And I agree with him that alfalfa has been demonized by many of our leaders in the water sector, many of our policymakers, and certainly by segments of our press. And JB properly pointed out that there was probably some alfalfa-based products upstairs. I could only find the cheese, and so because there wasn't any beef. But the reality is our country and many countries in the world have a diet that is based on animal products. And it is remarkable when we demonize a sector that is growing a product that is sustaining human life. And we say, hey, you're doing that wrong. That is an inappropriate crop to grow and grow. The reality is, and this is, again, where JB and I agree, is there is a market demand for those products. And so he said it rather tongue-in-cheek that, it starts, your water conservation starts at home. It's true. Our diets dictate what the market produces. So does our farm bill, so we can work through that as well. But I do think it's really critical to think about that and our connection to it. And we have a lot of forage crops that are grown in western Colorado. There are our per acre consumption of water is almost a third of what it is in the Imperial Irrigation District. But that's because we get 2, maybe 3 cuttings of alfalfa or hay, where they get 9 or 10 or more cuttings. And so there are trade-offs. It is really critical to understand that food, just like water, is absolutely essential for the 20 million people that Adele serves. The food is absolutely essential for all of us. And how do we do it in a way that respects the economic system and political system that our country is built on? We've seen examples of governments planning agriculture in 5, 10-year chunks of time and dictating what crops are grown. That has led to massive famine and millions of people dying. It is not the way we need to go in this country in terms of having policy from the federal government dictate what crops are appropriate to be grown. Does that mean we don't incentivize good behavior? No, we need to do that. We need to think about it, but not in a dictatorial fashion. I want to say that in the 6 years I've been in my job, there has been a real sea change in the agricultural producer community. There is a big recognition by almost every producer that I work with and talk with that they have to be part of a solution. They understand that the mass balance in the Colorado River is way out of whack. There's too much demand and too little supply. I will tell you that agricultural producers that tend to distrust, and I'm going to generalize quite a bit here, but tend to distrust the what is today called the liberal media, recognize firsthand that climate change is real. Just as the residents of the service area in LA, our residents live with climate change every single day, and they understand it. They may not call it climate change, but they will identify with anyone in this room about the changes that you have witnessed and they have witnessed, especially producers that are multi-generational producers, and those that track their production and their activities and their water use, and there are a lot of families that do. They can see the changes, and they will admit and talk about it. And they also have this really unique history that I think we need to tap into, which is innovation, right? And it's innovation that allowed the agricultural industry to develop in the Colorado River Basin. Despite what John Wesley Powell recommended, we went ahead and settled this region, and we put farms and ranches and big cities in places that others thought we probably shouldn't, but we did it. And the question is, how do we help with that innovation? How does that history of innovation transform today in ag? And our district, the state of Colorado, the Bureau of Reclamation is sponsoring, and a whole bunch of others, the Nature Conservancy, all sorts of NGOs, are sponsoring efforts to transform agriculture. You know, in our district alone, we are seeing all sorts of experiments with forage crops, with different types of forage, because do you have a better drought-resistant crop out there? And our producers are willing to sign up and try them out. They're looking at those ways, and they're trying to figure out how they do it. And you know, yes, they need some incentives. Yes, they need some security, just like anybody who runs a small business. But they're participating in those efforts. It is something in terms of understanding the multi-year impacts when you dry up a field. What happens the next several years to the production and the ability of that family to sustain their living? So those are things that they're looking at and understanding. But what you're not hearing from most of our producers is, hell no, we're not part of the problem, go away, right? It is really about how do we help solve these problems? And I think that's important, because I do think that the cities are doing that. There are some really commendable things. But again, going back to the fact that agriculture is not monolithic in the basin, even within my district, we have areas that, frankly, I firmly believe, and I would invite people to come out and look, are really appropriate for continued flood irrigation. Because the farmland today in the Intermountain West, the irrigated land provides about 58% of the wetlands that exist in the Intermountain West. It's irrigated ag. That's waterfowl habitat, that's wildlife habitat, that's water cleaning efforts through the soil. And in our upper basins, and I will just look at the Gunnison Basin for an example. In the upper Gunnison Basin, they have a wet meadows project where they are demonstrating the importance to the ecosystem of having these very saturated wet meadows. It's a phenomenal project, and it's an effort that trying to document the impacts. You know, we're talking about investing millions and millions of dollars in beaver dam analogs and reintroducing beavers. We actually have that. That's what our ag is doing in many of the high upper basin areas in the Intermountain West. So it's appropriate there, but just down the Gunnison River, we have a soil change that is Mancos Shale, and Mancos Shale has incredibly high selenium and salt. And the flood irrigation that was taking place, including on golf courses and yards, created a huge water quality problem in the lower Gunnison that was creating a real adverse impact on endangered species. And after partnering, and I think this is really important as to how we do things, we partner with the federal government, the state government, and our district and others, and producers, and improve their systems and switched a bunch of systems over to much more efficient operation. The lower Gunnison, after 10 years of that effort, was taken off the 303D list in our state for selenium. We dropped that level way below. And by the way, that also means there's more water in the river because we're not diverting it out and flooding that soil in that area. So it depends on where you are and how you operate, right? And so that gets into the discussion about the guidelines, right? So the question is, how do we implement what the Upper Basin has identified, the states have identified as a parallel activity, a conserved consumptive use program of some type? How does the Lower Basin continue its efforts in conservation in a way that frankly supports irrigation, it supports food production, it supports, very importantly, the communities that depend on it, and recognizes those differences within those communities. And I want to just hit on a few of the kind of the policy considerations to think about. You know, when we talk about one size doesn't fit all, the two largest agricultural producers in western Colorado are the two tribes, the Ute Mountain Utes and the Southern Utes. I think the tribal leaders did a remarkable job, the last panel, describing just how horrendous the institutional historical abuse that the people have suffered. And when we talk about trying to diminish the agricultural footprint in the water consumption, in our districts, in our area in western Colorado, you're talking about the tribes. How do we support them in their effort to succeed at becoming financially vibrant, more vibrant? How do we help their communities develop? And agriculture is a part of that. How do we make sure that is effective and done right? We have non-Indian irrigators, plenty of them in our district. We have, again, we have high mountain, we have row crops, we have orchards. When you go down the river, you have really large production of food that our country depends on. All of that, how do you customize those programs? And, you know, I think that there have been great efforts to try to, on these pilots, to figure some of this out. And I think we've really got to learn the lessons from the pilots and apply them as we move forward. You know, I'll identify that we don't want to see any one region, agriculture, take the hit in order for everybody else to survive. As Adele says, we don't want to leave anybody behind. But in the system conservation pilot program within our state this past year, every drop of water participated from the state of Colorado came off the western slope. There's a tremendous amount of Colorado River water that irrigates land in the Platte Basin and the Arkansas Basin. And all of our cities along the Front Range and in the western slope all use agriculture too. But every drop of water in the system conservation pilot program came out of western slope ag. That's not sustainable if we're going to gear that up and get enough water to actually make a difference in the system, right? It has to actually come from all of the sectors geographically, which means the programs have to be designed by you, the policymakers in this room, in a way that actually spreads out that potential impact among the water users. And that's what we would ask, is an intelligent effort. And I want to point to an effort that the Uncompahgre Valley water users, our largest irrigated bureau project, largest project in western Colorado, but it's a Bureau of Reclamation project. We have engaged with the Freshwater Trust and are developing a decision support tool to help inform what would be good about how water conservation programs are implemented, how they can be done, maximizing the economic benefit, minimizing the cultural harm. And I'll tell you what, it's going to be very different within their system than it is just up the river in the Upper Gunnison Valley, because it's a very different system. But right now, we're operating those programs at a 100,000-foot level. When the money gets released, there's no sideboards and there's no thought about how and where it goes and how it impacts those communities. So I think it's really critical. the benefits of ag from an economic perspective, the tourism benefits, the clean water benefits, the return flows that create late season recreational fishing, all of those things need to be considered because they're community benefits. And that's one of the things that I would also say about these programs. Right now, the Upper Basin program just paid individual producers. It didn't pay the communities. It didn't think about or try to figure out how we actually mitigate the harm to the communities that may occur with the reduced economic production. I know that MET and the Palo Verde system have tried to mitigate the community harm. Having been down in Blythe, I'm not sure it's worked really well. I'll just be honest. I think there's better ways to do it. I don't think bringing in a Subway restaurant is the answer to economic development in a community. That's one of the things that they've chosen to do with the funds that MET has provided. So how do we do sustainable economic development, and how do we make that happen, right? And I think it's yeah, we felt and we feel like we are in a crisis. But we have to create that space to be thoughtful about this and do it the right way so that we aren't pitting each other against one another. Because in a crisis mentality, someone's going to lose. That is what happens when you create a crisis, and someone ends up losing because you don't have time to think about it. So the time that has been gained by the short-term changes in the operations is good. I would ask, and I think agriculture would ask, can we find time to think about how we do this right for the communities that depend upon agriculture and all of those other benefits. And so I think that's really my main point is I think there are ways to do it to support those communities much better than we have figured out to date. So.
Thank you all, and we have Slido.
Had a trio of questions come in that are all connected. And I think the best way maybe to navigate them is to go back to Andy, right, for the initial answer. Yeah, so a couple connected questions about ag. The overarching theme is what's already been broached. If we're talking about sustainable water management in the agricultural sector, what does that look like? What's needed to make that happen? That's kind of the overarching question. And the more specific measures that are touched on the question, there's two of them. What kind of support might be needed to increase production in the agricultural sector of climate-adapted crops, whether that's alfalfa substitutes, beef alternatives, et cetera. And the other really specific question is, subsidization. If we're working towards sustainable water use in the agricultural sector, is a viable approach reliance upon federal subsidization of alternative agricultural practices, or potentially state subsidization of alternative agricultural practices? I know that's a lot.
All right. Well, I can try to answer that. I would say that I'm pretty pessimistic that anybody can rely on continued generosity from the federal government. I think that the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA are really wonderful once-in-a-generation opportunities. And the idea that we will have, $8-12 billion every few years to inject it into the southwestern economy to help us adapt to climate change, I don't think is realistic. I think there are lots of voices in our political world that scream against that kind of spending. They just happen not to be in control when those two bills were passed. And so I think that you can't count on that. And because of that, I think that it is really critical to use these once-in-a-generation funds to look at long-term durable solutions that, the crop experiments, forage crop experiments that we're engaged in, what you've got to do is be able to prove them up to the producers, prove that there's a market, that it will provide the equivalent nutrients for the animals, show that it can be done on a scale that actually works. And I think that's what a lot of the efforts that we're engaged in right now in our state and the federal government are engaged in is aimed at. And I think that's good, because I think you've got to show that it works in the market before it can take off. I mean, I just use the crazy hemp world that came about in Colorado and Western Colorado a few years back. All sorts of historic ag producers thought they were going to strike it rich by switching over to hemp. And many of them lost parts of their farm as a result of that activity. And it was a really rough thing. So trying to make it appealing and make it work and understand how it fits in the market is really critical. So, we end up hiring and sponsoring not just the work on the field, but economists and agricultural specialists to assist in trying to figure out how those markets can function and how it works. So I think it's that kind of work, but I don't think that it is reasonable to think that we will continue to have the federal government available to pay for all of this fallowing and this water conservation. So how do we find those long-term solutions?
How do we find long-term solutions in a short period of time? I think as you just said, and I also think Commissioner Tootin said, we have to put the money that we have available to good use right now. I heard $700 million for 700,000 acre feet in the lower basin for conserving water and putting water to good use, and that she's eager to put same types of funds available in the upper basin. I'd like to see that happen, because we need to have it happen. I think pilot programs are absolutely necessary. You're 100% right. But I think that if we talk about it a lot and worry about what could potentially happen without trying things, we're never going to get there. So we have to put the money that's available to good use now, because whether people want to think, I don't think that we're going to get a bipartisan infrastructure law or, of how many tens of billions of dollars for the whole country were available again. But the problem's not going to go away in 2026 or when the funds are spent in 2031. The need is going to be there. And if we can show how we can put the money to good use. But I think to do that, we have to be innovative, as you said. And the only way we're going to be innovative in the upper basin, in the lower basin, in the delta, for the tribes, is if we have the space and the willingness to talk to each other. And we have to be able to talk to each other. And I think that's where the guidelines come in, because they can either shut everything down where we can't talk about anything, or they can open it up and we can talk about a lot of different things. So I think there's opportunity and maybe an obligation for us to take action now and do it right, so that we can continue this option going forward.
All right, thank you so much for those thoughtful responses on the initial question. There's a connected one, and it has to do with, I'm paraphrasing, the use of market mechanisms, the use of the free market in the different sectors to promote water conservation. Could you comment a little bit about that? So Adele, with respect to, say, the municipal sector, Andy, with respect to ag, and Karen, perhaps with respect to environmental protection, environmental restoration. What role, if any, do you see for free market mechanisms in promoting water conservation or other kind of laudable policy goals within your respective sectors?
I'll talk about the things that we're thinking about is this idea of, as part of the new business model we're looking at is, if you are, how can we incentivize conservation? So right now, if you conserve, that water will go somewhere. It is no benefit to you. So if we have 26 member agencies, and let's just think, and this is just part of a thinking process that we're going right now. If we assign an allocation based on certain use, and you are using less than what you allocated that amount of water, you should be able to monetize that amount of water that you have saved to benefit the region as a whole. So that now is rewarding conservation. At the same time, it's giving money to communities that need money, underserved communities. 60% of my communities are actually underserved. So take money that they can invest back into the system. So we need to get some creative ideas that can allow for exchanges. So if you're not using the water, then you can give it to somebody else that can benefit from it, that can store it, that we can put it on the market. And we're finding new ways. There's a lot of ideas that we're putting out. That's why I centralized sustainability, resiliency, innovation in one office under my office right now, because I see them all connected. And there's a way that we can put out. We put an RFP and request for interest. Some of the land that we own, that's desert land, we are actually putting it out for some beneficial uses. And I'm talking to folks, for example, of taking some arid land and actually creating greenhouses and planting in it that have solar and also have stormwater capture, rain capture. There's a lot of ideas that we can do, but I think to me is how you can reward people for good behavior and how we can take that water now and monetize it across the region to give it back so it can be reinvested. And I use the example of the Board Irrigation District that by them having an agreement with us on seasonal fallowing or seasonal farming, we're able to give them money for water that they saved, they haven't used, that we can put back in Lake Mead, and they use the money to invest in on-farm conservation, some automation, and lining of canals. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and I think we can actually open the door for more collaboration. And you know, it's very difficult for a lot of public agencies to do a lot of R&D and put money out there for things that may not be proven. So one of the ideas that I've been always advocating for, if we put something out where somebody else is taking the risk and you have to show the benefit and then you're rewarded based on the results. So we're not putting money out there. So that project that we're looking at in Palo Verde, taking a desert and converting that into a solar farm with certain job connection to the community, can bring us $2.5 million a year that we can invest back in our community, in the things that we need to do. So it's good for the environment, good for carbon reduction and climate action, but also it's good for the community. So, but we're not doing it. We're actually going through a public-private partnership and putting it out there. So we can do more probably on other things that we can do, but there is a need for us to kind of take the blinders off and do some more creative stuff.
It's an interesting question. I guess I would say you got to look at that in historic context. The compact writers got a few things wrong about the water availability and other things, exclusion of the tribes, to say the least. But one of the things that I think they got right was that water is a public resource and is our state, big believers in the prior appropriation doctrine, went and advocated that we, instead of following the prior appropriation doctrine, created an equitable apportionment. And the reason was we were really afraid that Southern California was going to grow into some 20 million people megalopolis, and they were going to want all the water, right? And that's why they said that. They said that free market's going to lead to the water all being used down there and allocated down in the lower basin. And so it concerns me in that dollars can be used to deprive communities of water, which means that they can be used to deprive communities of their future. And so if you have an unrestrained free market in the water, moving water around, you end up putting at risk incredibly vibrant, wonderful communities. You end up doing exactly what Adele said we don't want to do. And that's, so I'm concerned about that. And in the context of today's world where we've got discussions about demand management or some conserved consumptive use program, it is concerning. One of the things you've heard from the debates within Colorado is we want to see that as temporary. Well, what does that mean? in the context of a climate change-driven drought that is likely to continue to reduce the available water, how can you have temporary water conservation? You need permanent, long-term water conservation. Well, the idea is, how do you keep the agricultural industry alive and functioning so that they can produce food, so that our nation has food security, so that our nation isn't at someday lining up at food trucks that are being imported, food drops from some other region of our country or outside of our country, right? How do you provide that food security to our region? And so if you follow a free market, frankly, we have great concerns. I mean, look at the history of the Bureau of Reclamation, right? That is one of the biggest socialist projects that this country has ever implemented. And it worked. It worked really well. It has created the society in which all of us live and care about in the Southwest. And it is a fundamental building block because our government said we've got to invest in public money in water infrastructure. And that's very different than a free market. And I know that a lot of my constituents don't see it that way. They're big believers in the free market. So I'm saying things that I know many people disagree about. But the reality is, the history of it is that we have decided a long time ago that water is a public resource and water is different than almost any form of property. And we've got to remember that when we talk about the vibrancy of communities.
I'd say, just to take that to an ecosystem, natural system component, I agree. I think what I'm hearing from Andy is unfettered free market is dangerous. But I think we also have learned from 2021 and 2022, if not before, we need some flexibility in the system as well, for people and for natural systems. And so free market, no, but a market with guardrails potentially, and guardrails can include priorities, incentivizing certain things over others, multiple benefit projects that actually consider the environment on top of other things, might get paid more or might get compensated more or might get opportunities more. I can't underscore enough that the integrity of the resources that we all rely on are imperative for us to go forward. So we have to find ways to be able to provide a solution going forward so that we can have food for our people, but it's going to be more than just compensation for water. You're also going to need to actually have the soils, and if you're reducing somewhere, you better make sure you don't have a dust bowl, those kind of situations. So I definitely think that there are ways to identify solutions with flexibility that has guardrails, and maybe opportunities not just for the Bureau of Reclamation to come in and help save the day, which we still appreciate and hope continues. But also, I mean, we have, philanthropic, we have private interests, we have public-private partnerships all the time. I think the innovation still needs to be able to churn, to be able to because as I've heard many say, there's no silver bullet, right? There's silver buckshots now is the saying, I think we're saying. Well, we have to test them. And I would love for us to be continuing to have the opportunity to test them. So keep the minds open and keep going forward.
All right. I don't want to stay on economics too much longer, but there is a follow-up question that a fair number of folks expressed interest in concerning water pricing and the role of water pricing vis-a-vis water conservation. The way I'll read the question as it's written, but I think it applies also in the municipal sector. Most consumers don't appreciate the water cost of cattle-derived products. Existing subsidies keep these products cheap. Would more accurate pricing change consumer demand? That's an ag-focused question, but I think a similar perspective could be applied to the tier structures or the pricing structures of municipal water providers as well. So what function do you see, or what value do you see added in, innovative or progressive approaches to water pricing?
It's not an easy thing. I don't know how much when to me, it's unfortunate that people are willing to pay $200, $300 a month for their cable or for their cell phone and not willing to pay $50 a month for the water bill. It's mind-boggling. And if you try to increase your rates by, anything, whatever, 5%, 10%, a lot of people are afraid of being recalled and voted out, and it's not real. So I'll tell you, we have to do a lot of hard work, and the dilemma we're looking at is because just went through the budget process, and over the last 2 years we've seen a huge reduction in our water use. The water use that we're using right now is 1.2 million acre feet in metropolitan in terms of our sales. 10 years ago was 2.5, 20 years ago was 3.5. To me, the revenue was coming from sales, but we're incentivizing people to not buy our product. So for us to sustain we had $800 million in reserves, and now, it's down to 200 something. We had to find a way to recover the cost. And we had to really get into a huge debate. And some of the questions was asked is, am I being penalized because I'm conserving? I have to pay more water. And the answer we tried to get across is that actually your costs would have been much, much higher if you did not conserve, because we had to create some water that we didn't have, and it would have been hugely costly. So by conserving, actually it's cheaper, but still the cost of water is higher. So we increased our rates by 8.5. We had to get some fixed rates, which for the first time since 1990. But I'll tell you, if you haven't read the op-ed piece or the editorial in the LA Times, it was amazing after our rates. It's really, I think I'm going to just read the conclusion at the end. It talks about that the options before us is either we have a sporadic system or a reliable system, and it's going to cost us more. And at the conclusion, the editorial board said, reliability is worth it. So it's a great thing, but still it's a huge issue for our consumers. So we still have to find a way to assist low-income communities. So that's why I support the federal government's efforts for low-income assistance program for water. Senator Padilla introduced it, and I highly support that and our efforts. There is also another bill being introduced as we speak right now, a bipartisan bill to help folks that are receiving rebates to conserve water. At the federal level, if you receive more than $600, that amount of money is taxable. It's crazy. It should not be. And now we're making it correct. We're trying to get that in place. If I am a homeowner, I want to invest money in conservation, and it's more than $600, I'm getting a rebate, I'm not going to do it. And if I'm an underserved community and I want to do something in my home, I can't do a application and then put money up and then wait for a reimbursement. So that's why we're working with the federal government under the Inflation Reduction Act that 40% of the funding will go towards underserved communities. And one of the things we're looking at is direct install. So we're trying to be creative. So when we go do energy audits, with the same contractor doing energy audits in a home under the gas company is doing water audits, and they do replacements of fixtures and things that are doing it. And the homeowner is not paying for it. We're paying for it directly, and now there is no in between. I think the cost of water will go up. There's no question about it. But I think it's also a public messaging, a communication thing, and I think to me we take water for granted. I know water is a human right, but also it costs water to clean the water up, to save it, to conserve it, to store it, and to build the infrastructure to move it. We need to do a better job communicating it, and it's going to take all of us together saying how important this is, and imagine a day without water. None of us want to do that, and so we need to continue the efforts and continue the communication. But people have challenged us about, I'm conserving, and now I'm paying more money because I'm conserving. And the answer is you have paid a lot more money to come up with water that we didn't have. And that's what the message, and it takes a lot to get that message across.
Andy, Karen, any input on the water pricing question? As it bears on water conservation?
Yeah, I would say that if we had a functional food market in our country where food prices weren't set by a cabal of grocery store chains, that I think the idea of raising the input cost for a producer would be reasonable because the economic theory would allow them to pass that on to the end consumer. Today, all of our agricultural producers are running into huge pressure from the handful of grocery store chains that are buying food, and they are forcing the lowest dollar possible. And so while we benefit as consumers from cheap food in our stores, the ag producers are going under every day because the price point keeps getting shoved down because there's no competition in the grocery store chain. Our Attorney General and the Biden administration and others are going after some of the mergers that are trying to consolidate that industry even more. I think that if we raise the cost of water, for instance, try to do that to a number of our producers, we would see early 1980s style bankruptcies on farms, and it would really tremendously impact our agricultural industry and therefore our food security. So I don't think our market's functional enough to allow that direct kind of action to happen.
Go ahead.
All right. Thank you. I lied too, because the vicious crowd here turned me into a liar. We do have one more economics question, at least political economics, all right? I think it's a good one though. So each of you have talked about the importance of climate adaptation with respect to your sectors, right? And each of you have broached the subject of funding, right? Revenue is needed for climate adaptation. The question is, how are each of you thinking about future funding for climate resilience for your respective communities and sectors? Where's the money going to come from for those climate adaptation, climate resilience measures?
I'll take that one real quickly. We, back in 2020, went to our voters and explained that we needed help to help them adapt to the changing world in water in Western Colorado, and asked for a 100% increase in our tax base. And in one of the most tax-averse areas of the country, with the help of a whole lot of people, we were able to convince 72% of our voters to vote yes and double their taxes in the middle of the pandemic. And we have reinvested that money back into our community every single year, and it is all about climate adaptation. And I think our communities are willing to pay if you make the case and you explain it to them and you do a good job in communication. I think people will get it and they will support spending more money of their own money. I mean, we did some polling, 4 years later, we did some polling just recently, and we actually have 93% of our voters who would say they would vote again for a tax increase for us, even though they just doubled our taxes. So it's crazy.
It's, for our business model, to me, is we're shifting it. So we think there is about $20 to $30 billion of resiliency investment over the next 20 years, right? Pure water by itself, pure water, Southern California, the 150 million gallons a day recycled water, it's about $8 billion, right? So $20 to $30 billion. What we're doing right now, as we're developing the plan, looking at this money and figuring out how we're gonna pay for it. And we think it has to be done as what we've done in the old days, is everyone, the 20 million people we have to share in the cost of resiliency. It's not only the few that buying water. Because if only the few that are buying water, it will create a huge cost spike for folks, especially the folks that have not done their investment in local water supply. So I think we need to divide and create more what I call fixed revenue that's shared by the 20 million people we have. Hopefully we'll still have some help from the federal government, and also we have a effort underway in California for a climate resiliency bond. We're advocating for it. We're working through it for a measure on the November ballot. But still, most of the money is local. But then if you're buying water, there is another tier for buying water. There is a way that we can say, you're gonna pay for the water you're using, and if you stay within your use, you take, like tiered structure at the wholesale level, And it's a different discussion we're having. I know a lot of people are questioning. I'm not fully, there's a whole process happening right now. I don't want to be undermining the process, but I still think if you are, there's cheaper water and there's more expensive water, and your use will dictate how much you pay. We should not amalgamate the cost of water that everybody will pay the same cost, but it should incentivize. If you stay within your use, you'll pay that cheaper water. If the next one is desal or recycled, next one is desal or brackish water cleanup, whatever we call it. And depending on the use, you'll pay more for the water. And that money can then invested back. So I think there's a lot of creative ways, but I think the public has to see it and have to understand what it means. And there's a whole campaign that's needed. And I still think there is a lack of appreciation of the value of water and the importance of water, no matter what. And my biggest scare is when we had the drought, 2021, 22, I had people say, it doesn't matter how much it costs, we'll pay for it. The same people now, 2 years later, saying, why are we investing in this? And the same policymakers. And I was like, didn't you say 2 years ago that you'll pay anything for that water because you don't want to have your community suffer? And now we were on health and safety, and now they're questioning this investment in recycled water. And I keep reminding them, imagine if we go back. We will go back to what we had 2021, 22, hotter and drier days with no water and no rain, and we're going to be dealing with the reserves we have and our local water supply. And I think we need to invest. And the people that built the aqueduct from the Colorado River, they believed in the need to do it, and they taxed themselves. I looked at the video. I don't know if you people seen that video in the movie theater that was put out to allow people to vote on the September 1928. It was amazing that actually we were able to reach to the public in that message for people to invest in the future of their communities. And we need to do the same thing. And it's going to take all of us working together, not fighting each other.
I would just add to that. I mean, so again, I don't represent any of the conservation groups, so they can all kick me, but I can also think that many of them have a number of members, thousands of members that are interested in the whole basin and the whole thriving of the community, that are willing to put their money where the mouth is, as long as they're not watching it turn into dust. So if we can all jump together and do our part, not just in conserving, but actually funding things, I think that's good. And I do think I don't think any one entity or government agency is going to be able to fund us out of the solution. But I think that we need to show the commitment that we are going to get to a solution. And I think in doing that, you're going to get a lot of people interested in making sure it's stable.
All right, looks like we have time for one final question. I've been saving this one. This is the intersectoral question, right? This panel is unique because we're talking about a sectoral perspective on water management instead of focusing on the sovereigns like a lot of the other panels have. The question is this: can we envision a future where water deliveries for irrigation provide environmental benefits on the way to users, and return flows are maximized for urban use? My spin on that as facilitator is, what do you see as the most promising things that might be done to facilitate collaboration, to make added value between, say, ag and municipal sectors, environmental and ag sectors, whichever direction you want to take it across the sectors?
I'll go first. I think that you see examples of this in projects throughout the basin. It's multiple partnerships working together for the benefit of creating water, conserving water, maximizing the use of water. And I think that the key component of that is trust, a willingness to talk and work out the differences and factor in the different concerns. We've seen it with projects on the Front Range. We've seen it in projects on the Western Slope. We have seen it between the Western Slope and the Front Range. Amazingly enough, it has happened in at least my time. And that's just in Colorado. I think the same thing, I would applaud Utah in their progressive ways of looking at how to manage and make water more flexibly governed. And I think those types of examples need to be amplified. But to be intersectoral, you have to have a willingness to talk, and you have to have a framework to work within. And I'm very hopeful that we can expand the examples that we've had in our basins to be broader. Whether they go between the basins, I don't know, but within the, even if it's just within the upper basin or if it's just within the lower basin, there are ways to make that happen. And between the United States and Mexico. A perfect example I think Commissioner Salmon talked about was Minute 316 was a pilot program to run the humidisalter, and it brought both the United States government, the federal, the Mexican government, and NGOs together to find the solution and fund the solution. I think, and that involved solutions that included MWDs, SNWA, CAWCD, all of those kind of things. We know how to do this. We just need to do it more.
And I would say, you know, our district, and I know the state of Colorado, prioritize multi-benefit projects when we're looking at projects to fund. We're asking our water users constantly, go get together with, if you're an ag user, go get together with the environmental groups and talk about how your project can benefit the stream and benefit your farms and ranches, and put a proposal together that does both of those things. Talk about how you can help, a city can help restore a stream and at the same time improve its own water delivery system, and then we'll invest in it, right? And I think we've been very successful at that within the state of Colorado. I think we can always do more. I mean, really, probably to me, the most glaring example of that right now in Western Colorado is our collective effort to buy a non-consumptive water right in the middle of the Colorado River, right, the Shoshone power plant. We have support from every sector of our communities, and our community is very politically diverse, you know, but the high elevation liberal counties and cities are throwing money in. The low elevation extractive community or industry communities are throwing money into the project. We are all banding together. The environmental groups, most of the local, regional, and national environmental groups have signed up in support. Our Chamber of Commerce's have signed up in support. There are ways to look at water projects and water resiliency issues that bring everybody together. This is an incredible benefit to the Endangered Species Program because of the benefits to the critical reach. It actually will deliver water to the lower basin. And imagine that, you know, and it will result in a much more healthy, resilient Colorado River because everybody has come together and sees their mutual interest. And it requires exactly what Adele said, trust. We have to trust each other, and we have to and in order to trust, we have to talk, and get to and keep that approach.
I mean, recycled water is really the biggest thing, and it cannot, you know, we have issues like in Mexico where you have water quality issues because of environmental issues. But imagine if we're able to invest there and clean up and create a environmentally safe system at the same time that water is being used to augment our water supply. But also, you know, one of the biggest challenges, I know IID and all of us want to make sure that the Salton Sea is taken care of. And that's the same thing, because as we conserve more and more, you want to make sure you're not leaving somebody behind. And so that's why we keep insisting that investments is needed in protecting the environment. That's why we're investing in the multi-species conservation program, but also finding new ways to capture rain and put it in the ground. That's why this Measure W and the stuff that we've done in LA is required that people capture water on their property and infiltrate into the ground. Cleaning up of groundwater basins that have been contaminated or brownfield, whatever we need to do to protect them. There's a lot of work that we need to do. It's going to cost money. But I think, to me, we need to think outside the box and figure out how we do it. I think every drop that we can capture, recycle, conserve, and store is a drop that can save us and can be added to this pie that making the pie bigger. Right? What's the rule of negotiations from the Harvard School of whatever, if any, is make the pie bigger? let's make the pie bigger. And I think once we make the pie bigger, it's easier to divide it and make it a good thing. I think we can do that. And I think there is a willingness, and I'm optimistic, and I think we'll do the right thing.
And I'd be remiss just if people are actually looking for specific examples of where this has worked in many of the states throughout the basin, there's a postcard with a QR code that shows all of the examples of what we've been doing on many multi-benefit projects throughout the basin so far. So it's on the front desk up there.
I'd like to thank our panelists.
Great, man. Good to see you.
Yes, thank you to the panel, and thank you, John. We have one more talk today, and we don't not have a break before that talk, so don't be wandering off. If you wander off, you're going to hurt Carly's feelings. So when we were organizing this, people, please. When we were organizing this conference, Matt McKinney said, how is reclamation going to take all this input? What sort of black boxes are going to go through to come out at the other end is a draft EIS? And I'm pretty sure he didn't say, how is reclamation going to do this? He said, how is Carly going to do this? So that's the people, come on. Carly, it's going to be a tough crowd. So Carly, who I've known for 20 years, is the Senior Water Resources Program Manager at Reclamation. Not at all? Well, damn it, I'm doing what I can. Maybe if we were quieter in the room, maybe? Oh my God. It's working. It's just, we just have a lot of side conversations. People, come on. I'll stop this conference right here. Okay. So Carly, I give the best introductions, don't I? So I've known Carly for 20 years, and she gets all the tough assignments, and you're not going to disagree with it. And this is a tough assignment, and I know you're going to say it's not a black box of how you take all this information and translate it to the draft EIS, but it's a mystery to a lot of us. So why don't you tell us about it? All right.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, the moment you've all been waiting for, where I'm going to take all of the complex concepts and perspectives we've heard throughout the day, and tell you how we're going to just masterfully weave it into this very clear process and lead the basin to a consensus. It's coming right now. So I'm glad you guys quieted down for this. Yes. Okay, so thank you for the introduction, Doug. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. So I joke, of course. We very much do not take lightly the gravity of the very kind of powerful perspectives, complex issues that have been discussed throughout the conference today. I am backed by a team of amazing people, and together we're working on the post-2026 process, which is a NEPA process to hopefully arrive at a preferred alternative and lead us into the adoption of a new set of guidelines. So I'm going to talk about the process standpoint and then also get into a little bit of substance. Okay. Move us to the next slide here. There we go. All right. So first, I thought I would start with just a reminder of what this process is and what it is not. So sitting here is the record of decision for the 2007 interim guidelines that was recently amended through the SEIS process. So first and foremost, our job is to develop the successor to this document. The 68 Act tells the Department and Reclamation to coordinate the operation of the Colorado River system, and we found out through history and previous operating experience that just doing that year to year without a set of consensus-based agreements is not a very helpful way to be operating the system in a system that needs some type of predictability about those operations. And so this expires. John Ensminger helpfully did the conversion to months for us. In 30 months, really 24 months, less than that, if we want to have these in place by the time we need to develop the 2027 operating plan, which would come even before the end of 2026, so in mid-2026. So, you know, when the 2007 guidelines were put into place, they were put in place for an interim period on purpose. It was to allow us a time to gain operational experience and an opportunity to learn, and that we definitely have done. We have needed to adopt successor agreements because we found out that these guidelines are not robust enough to deal with the challenges that started to unfold as drought continued on the basin. We also, and I'll speak to this a little bit down the road, but just kind of setting the stage a little bit, but we also learned a bunch about kind of the state of the science and the state of the tools that we were using to project system conditions and look at things like risk, and we've been hard at work to kind of update those to make sure that those things are in line for when we need to go to look at a different set of guidelines. We've also done some self-reflection. So in 2020, we did a review of the effectiveness of these guidelines, and we published very clearly that they are not robust enough to get the job done, that we need to be more robust in the future, and we need to do better with this crisis management mode, which I know has been referred to in several of the discussions today. So kind of this Band-Aid approach, again, is not providing the basin much certainty to plan for these future conditions. And then we've also done some outward-looking things, and that was really the pre-scoping that we launched before we officially started the NEPA process to replace the guidelines, and that gave us a lot of input in terms of the substance and the process that the basin was looking for as we took on post-2026. So one last piece here. While our focus is the domestic agreements for the post-2026 operations, because of the partnerships we've developed with Mexico, we'll be looking for a parallel process led through the IBWC, International Boundary and Water Commission, to start to work on a successor minute to minute 323. And so this is kind of a different approach than how we worked with Mexico back in 2007. The Mexico minutes and agreement were a follow-on after we had completed the 2007 guidelines, and this time we'll be working to do that in parallel. Okay, I'm just gonna grab my water. Okay, so enter then our NEPA process. I already talked about our pre-scoping. That was 2 years ago, and so now we are 1 year officially into the NEPA process. We issued a notice of intent right around this time last year and started a public scoping period. What came out of that, again, a lot of input, just as we received a lot of input on our pre-scoping. But the most significant things that came out of that scoping effort was a statement on our preliminary proposed federal action and anticipated purpose and need. And so I've put a couple of the key excerpts here on the slide. Maybe I'll just kind of point out things that are slightly different than the way 2007 framed what the proposed federal action was doing. Again, we're out, which was the same. We're out to adopt guidelines to coordinate Lake Powell and Meade for their full operating range. We're not out to redo the flood control operations, but we do need guidance and criteria for that full range of operations, although we recognize that the lower end is going to be the most challenging piece, and so we highlighted that as well. We also explicitly recognize that climate change is a thing and that we need to provide a set of guidelines that allows for the sustainable management of the system and its resources in a future of climate change. We lay out the key elements of the proposed federal action, which are largely the same as 2007. So we have to have the shortage guidelines, the surplus guidelines, so that gives the Secretary guidance on circumstances under which above, below, and at 7.5 million acre feet to the lower basin would be delivered. We also need criteria to coordinate the operation of Powell and Meade. And we need criteria to further something like an ICS mechanism or some type of mechanism to store conserved water in Lake Meade. And what we did a little bit different this time around was we expanded that to potentially include Lake Powell. We also specifically called out in our proposed federal action the need to, when we're looking at those conservation mechanisms, to ensure that they provide opportunities for tribal participation. And this is kind of a finding stemming out of that review on the effectiveness of the guidelines we did, where we really recognized that some of the provisions that are associated with the current conservation mechanism or the ICS mechanism in the lower basin is difficult for tribal participation, and so we wanted to ensure that was a part of our proposed federal action. On the purpose and need, this is just all the background that supports why we're doing the proposed federal action. We stress the need for innovative, flexible approaches to lead to these robust and sustainable future operating policies. We talk about the importance of tribal concerns and ensuring that these guidelines enable tribes to benefit from their existing water rights. We're trying to promote conservation. And the other thing we do in our purpose and need is just to kind of tee up the basics, right? The interim guidelines are expiring, and the Secretary is required to operate and coordinate the operation of the system. And that's sort of the most basic reason that why we're at this. And then lastly, so we put that scoping summary report out with all the purpose and need proposed federal action in October of last year through a Federal Register notice, and that kind of kicked off what we're calling the alternatives development phase, and that is where we currently are. We are about, I don't even want to do the month math there, but we're 6 months and counting into this alternatives development phase. So let me just talk a little bit about this. The goal of this phase is to develop a broad range of reasonable alternatives. And I'm going to talk about this a little more in the next couple slides. There's a lot packed into that and a lot of strategy packed into that. Right now, I just kind of want to highlight some of the, I think, really creative ways that we're trying to facilitate stakeholder collaboration and really kind of highlight some of the new research and development we had been at work on really since we released those 2007 guidelines, kind of gearing up to be ready with these new tools for the post-2026 effort. So featured here is a screenshot of our operations exploration web tool. It is hosted online. Anyone can go to it. It is fully linked up to our official planning model. That's the model that will be used to do the impact analysis for the EIS. So this is not kind of a simplified spreadsheet type thing. This is the real deal here. And anyone can go onto it and explore different Powell and Mead operational strategies to kind of understand what it takes to really put this system into balance and what some of those trade-offs are. So far, I'll just say we have, I think, 400 users that are actively in here looking at different strategies and have created 300 different strategies. This is not something that we are, it's not like we're in there watching people and pulling out ideas. We're using it to explore our own stuff, but this is really to allow stakeholders and our partners to kind of do their work and understand kind of how all of these things interact, so they can be better educated about the trade-offs and then why the impacts are the way they are once we start to move down the impact analysis stage of the game. Okay. So this is not our set of alternatives. This is what we're driving towards, though. These are the alternatives from the 2007 EIS process. We all know the alternatives are at the heart of any EIS process, and so we're working very hard to drive at really what I think this conveys, which is a kind of coherent, thematic, strategic set of alternatives. I want to hit again on like the importance of range. We have learned from the way that these alternatives were pieced together, even though we have a preferred alternative, which is where we are not currently. Let me step back and just say kind of a little bit about how these alternatives were crafted. No action, right? That's clearly a NEPA requirement. We'll definitely have a no action alternative. But there was also an alternative by the basin states. There was an NGO alternative, conservation before shortage. And then those second to last two, not the bottom row, were kind of reclamation, cooperating agency crafted alternatives to ensure that there was a broad enough range. Water supply we tried to maximize the amount of shortages that were occurring so that we would analyze a wide range of shortages, and reservoir storage was kind of protecting the reservoir at higher levels. And we have definitely benefited as a basin from the range of alternatives that we explored in 2007. If I went back to the previous slide where we looked at those different agreements that were adopted in sequence, Minute 323, GCP, Minute 330, the SEIS, all of these benefited in some way by the wide range of alternatives that we explored. And so we recognize the importance of that and are taking the same approach this time around. I think the other important aspect, and I think Andy Mueller said it perfectly in the panel before, is that we're trying to create the space for to be thoughtful, to have kind of thoughtful conversations and allow, hopefully, for a consensus to emerge. We don't have a preferred alternative. We don't have a basin states alternative, but we're trying to create the space and analyze and look at a wide range of alternatives that will hopefully allow for something like that to emerge. Let's see. Oh, I also wanted to hearken back to Vice Chair Lomayesva's comment about reasonable. That's sort of in the eye of the beholder a little bit. It's kind of a term of NEPA art. I think different entities will definitely feel very strongly about whether something is reasonable or not, and so we're taking that very carefully, but it is important to us that there is a wide range that will accommodate deals that we may not think are possible at this time in the conversation. Okay, so this is where we are right now. This and the next slide. So what you're looking at here is a table that reflects the proposals that we've received to date, at least the proposals that could be mapped into kind of a matrix format like this. I'm not going to talk through these or try to do an analysis of what's common and what's different. I think the entities who have submitted these proposals have had the opportunity to provide kind of that logic and context, and I know some others are coming a little bit later tomorrow, so look forward to those discussions there. This is just really to point out that we've got a lot of good input, a lot of good concepts, a lot of good ideas, but there are still some significant gaps. And these yellow boxes are just kind of highlighting, for each one of those different elements that would comprise the post-2026 guidelines. There's some important things not specified. And we have to decide whether we, Reclamation, are going to try to fill in those gaps, or if we're going to try to keep working with these entities to fill in these gaps, or if there's opportunities to do some combining in some of these. Again, trying to arrive at something like this, something that's a very kind of coherent, thematic set of alternatives that we can put forth into our impact analysis. I think one thing that I would say also is not represented in here, and also in the concepts that are to follow, is anything that kind of expressly protects Glen Canyon Dam infrastructure, or Hoover Dam infrastructure for that matter. And that's something that we're going to be looking carefully at, and we'll need to factor in. That's definitely a gap, and what's been received is something that kind of expressly looks to protect that infrastructure. So some other proposed concepts, these things don't really lend themselves to that type of matrix presentation, but they're extremely important. The top, tribal principles, the need to protect tribal water, and the need to empower tribes to use their water rights by providing additional flexibility. We have to figure out how to weave those things into operations so they can kind of work within that matrix format, and that's something we're taking very seriously and working hard on. A couple other concepts that are up there, we're also working on seeing how we can weave into the different alternatives as well. And I would just point out at the link above, if you just go to our post-2026 website, all of the original submittals that contain all of these ideas are on there, so you can kind of see all of the context and the logic for yourself. So just before I conclude and talk maybe a little bit about schedule, I just would say, if there's one thing to take away is that we're not lacking concepts or ideas. So don't send us any more input. No, I'm kidding. But we are not at a place where there is obviously a thematic consensus at this point, or a thematic set of alternatives, and that's what we're hard at work on. So just a little bit about schedule. The top are kind of the public milestones. The bottom in the blue are the reclamation activities. So we are still in the alternatives development phase and still looking for a target release of a draft by the end of this year. and then followed by, wrap up with the final EIS and move into developing and issuing the record of decision in that 24-month timeframe. So with that, thank you all.
Do we have questions? Apparently it's a doozy.
I only have to do one?
Yeah, but you have to get it right.
Okay. Okay.
Well, it's only one question, Carly.
Okay.
It's not easy.
Okay.
So, can you speak to the likelihood of reclamation enforcing a unilateral decision on water allocation, as the 7 states alluded to this morning?
Well, first of all, I should have said clearly in what this process is and isn't. It's not about water allocations. It's about developing a new set of operating guidelines. Our focus right now is to develop these alternatives and produce a rock-solid, defensible EIS. And if there's a consensus that emerges and that can be accommodated through our process, that's our hope and that's our expectation, as you heard from the commissioner this morning. But we also have to be prepared with a defensible document should there not be a consensus, and that's our focus right now.
All right, we should get it on.
Right. That's it. Easy.
Thanks, Carly. All right, she got that one right. Okay. We're going to end 2 or 3 minutes early because there's a reception upstairs. So let's do that instead. And maybe Carly will hang around to answer other questions. Okay. All right, thank you.